334. Most of the hermits and rangers in the mortal world were eccentric and could not be judged with common sense. Chen Pinggan didn't have a good impression of the green-robed man. Like what Liu Zong said, the road under everyone's feet was so wide that it was not a narrow path or a single log bridge. There was nothing wrong with everyone going their own way. Outside the inn, the sloppy green-robed man did not go far. In fact, he was squatting at the entrance of the inn with the skinny dog beside him. The man turned to look at the dog and felt that his life was worse than the dog's. He wanted to recite a poem, but after searching his stomach for a long time, he could not come up with a poem that the little cripple ridiculed as a limerick. The man comforted himself in his heart. "It's okay, Zhong Tiancheng, I got it by chance, there's no need to force it." On the second floor of the inn, Chen Pinggan was hesitant about whether to invite Zhu Lian again. The reason was that he wanted to stay in the Great Spring Dynasty for a while. He only had Wei Xian by his side and could only protect Pei Qian at most. It would be difficult for him to help. Once he was in a dangerous situation like the Lotus Blossom Blessed Land, Chen Pinggan was worried that he would make a mistake. After Chen Pinggan successfully invited Wei Xian from the first scroll, he did not touch the second one. It was not because he was distressed about the money. 11 pieces of divine rain money in exchange for the founding emperor of the Nanyuan kingdom, the historical number 1 person in the world. Chen Pinggan did not secretly rejoice and was very patient. The reason why the bottom line was set at 10 pieces of divine rain money was not that Chen Pinggan felt that Wei Xian was only worth this price. It was because he was afraid that the old Taoist, who seemed to be in a bad mood after their last meeting, would give him the scroll and he would not be able to afford it. The old Taoist did not break the rules, but he could also disgust people. Chen Pinggan could not keep gambling. After all, divine rain money was the most precious of the 3 types of divine rain money. 1 piece was equivalent to 1,000,000 taels of silver, a small mountain of silver. After annexing the Liu dynasty, the Dali dynasty was known as the strongest in the northern part of the Aquarius continent. 60 million taels of silver. Of course, this was only the money that the Song clan put on the table. Chen Pinggan could tell from the words of the little Daoist boy carrying the golden blade strengthening gourd that he had been biding his time for the past few days that there was something fishy going on. That guy was obviously trying to set him up. Furthermore, he was using the painting of martial madman Zhu Lian. Perhaps the old Daoist only dug a small hole for Chen Pinggan because of his reputation, but the little Daoist boy dug a big hole with all his might. Chen Pinggan piled up the rest of the Guyu money beside his hand. He picked up one and gently threw it into the painting. Looking at the rising clouds, one would never get tired of it. In the lobby on the first floor, the old man on the other side of the curtain tapped his pipe and stood up. He came to the counter and glanced outside. That poor scholar is not simple. The woman absent-mindedly fiddled with the abacus. "Third master, how many times have you nagged me? I know what I'm doing. I won't really anger him." The old man put his elbow on the counter and puffed out a cloud of smoke. He said in a deep voice, "If you really like him, just remarry. If your father doesn't agree, I'll back you up later." The woman stamped her foot and said angrily, "Third master, what nonsense are you talking about? How can I like him?" The old man said indifferently, "Isn't he good? Although I don't know his background, how many young people can there be in the border of Daquan who I can't see through? If he shaves his beard, maybe he can make do with his appearance." The woman directly ignored the last sentence. She raised her chin and pointed at Chen Pinggan's room. "How many can there be?" "Third master, this young foreign guest wearing a white robe and a red gourd hanging on his neck, as well as his personal retainer, can you see through their depth? You can't, right? Inside and outside the shop, aren't there 3 of them at once?" The old man said with a straight face. He wanted to go back to the kitchen and make some food for himself to reward his 5 viscera temple. "You took my kindness for granted. You deserve to be a widow for so many years." The woman had long been used to the old man's temper. She called out to him softly, "No matter what, the 3 people in the building are our benefactors. Don't act on your own initiative and drug them. Go back to those 2 rangers, I'll strip you naked and throw you at the gate of Hua Town in the middle of the night. You've turned those 2 men into virgins because of you. They almost died. The old man twitched the corner of his mouth and said, "They're not evil people. Why would I drug them? I'm afraid that you'll drug them and do whatever you want after they've been drugged." The woman pretended to slap him. "You can't spit out ivory from a dog's mouth." The old man was a serious person. "Go and ask Wangxi outside the door if it can spit out ivory." The woman retorted, "I'm not a dog. I can't chat with Wangxi, unlike you." The old man pointed at the woman with his pipe. "Whoever sees you in the future will be unable to hold down the coffin of their ancestors." The woman didn't care about these words. She had been in the marketplace for so many years, and she had run an inn for so many years. She had received guests from all over the world, and her words carried the smell of blood, knives, and vinegar. She had seen all sorts of things. She lowered her voice and said, "That great monster, could it have been killed by this person?" The old man shook his head. "If he's really the #1 general under the water god of Pine Needle Lake, only the Earth Immortals have such great ability. Although this sloppy scholar is definitely not simple, he can't be that strong. He's not like those old scholars in the academy. Those Confucian sages wouldn't hide their heads and tails after doing such a righteous deed. There's no need to deliberately hide it, right?" The woman fell into deep thought. The old man finally persuaded, "Okay, I won't say good things twice. I'll nag you one last time. I think that the poor scholar is a bit poor, a bit ugly, a bit mean, and a bit immoral. In any case, he's still a young and strong man." The woman's face darkened. She squeezed out a word from between her teeth, "Scram." The hunchbacked old man's expression was as usual. He turned and left. His weathered face was like the bark of an old tree. If a mosquito bit him, the old man could probably squeeze it to death with a slight frown. His palms were full of calluses. His hands were behind his back. His left hand was on his right wrist, and his right hand was holding an old pipe. The old man seemed to be talking to himself. "It's late at night, in the middle of winter. How strange. The little cripple even asked me about it today." The woman's face was slightly red. She gritted her teeth and scolded, "You old immoral thing, you deserve to be a bachelor for the rest of your life." The little cripple had just finished cleaning the table when he heard the conversation between the old hunchback and the lady boss. He said with a face full of curiosity, "Lady boss, what's going on? Our inn doesn't have a cat. Is it a stray cat that sneaked into the inn from outside? If I catch it, I'll definitely give it a beating." "I knew it. There are often missing drumsticks and steamed buns in the kitchen, so it must have eaten them secretly." "Lady boss, don't worry, I'll definitely find it." The woman took out a feather duster from behind the counter and hit the little cripple's head. "Find it, I'll let you find it." She was still angry. She went around the counter and chased after the young man who couldn't walk properly. The little cripple was beating him up so hard that he was almost flying. She threw the feather duster away and hesitated for a moment. She tiptoed downstairs and walked back and forth, but she didn't hear anything. She went back to the lobby on the first floor and was in a daze for a while. She went to the old hunchback's territory behind the curtain and took a palm-sized piece of dried meat from the kitchen. She also took a small pot of plum wine that had been brewed for half a year. She walked out of the inn and saw the scholar squatting beside the dog. She said hello, and when the green-robed man looked up, she threw the meat and wine to him and said coldly, "1 tael of silver. Put it on the bill, it's not free." The green-robed man didn't look away until the woman crossed the threshold and walked into the lobby. He sighed, "Wang Cai, do you know what this is called? This is called the most difficult thing to accept a beauty's favor." He tore off a small piece of meat and gave it to Wang Cai. Then he touched his beard. "If I shave my beard, what would happen?" When the woman went to the second floor, Chen Pingan gently pressed the scroll and turned to look at the door. Fortunately, the woman didn't knock on the door to disturb them. When she went down the stairs, Chen Pingan continued to throw money. Chen Pingan threw 12 grain rain coins at the scroll in one breath. Zhu Lian still didn't show up. Chen Pingan picked up the blade-strengthening gourd and then remembered that he didn't have any wine before entering the inn. He could only put it down gently. The yin deity of the Song family in Old Dragon City paid for the bamboo slip and took out 10 grain rain coins. Lu Tai of the Eagle Fort paid Chen Pingan 20 grain rain coins. Including the trip to the inverted mountain, Chen Pingan had a total of 29 grain rain coins. For Wei Xian, he gave 11 to the scroll, leaving him with 18. There were only 6 grain rain coins left on the table. Martial madman Zhu Lian was still painting and didn't want to come out. Then how many grain rain coins would Chen Pingan have to take out for the other 2 paintings, Lu Baixiang of the Devil Cult and Sui Yuyu, the only woman in the history of the Lotus Flower-blessed land? Chen Pingan sighed and glanced at the smiling old man in the painting. If he threw any more grain rain coins, he would really go bankrupt. Although he had accumulated quite a lot of grain rain coins and snow coins, it was only a number. When it was converted into grain rain coins, it had shrunk significantly. Chen Pingan felt a little helpless. He put away the scroll and hid it in the 15 flying swords. He opened the door and went downstairs to drink to relieve his boredom. Because he was carrying Wei Xian Lu, he forgot to fill the blade strengthening gourd with wine. Shaking the empty ginger gourd, Chen Pingan thought about the little Daoist boy who carried the huge golden gourd. His confidant said that the other 6 blade strengthening gourds were the best in the world. Could the one carried by the little Daoist boy be the best in storing wine? Chen Pingan wasn't sure at the moment and accidentally guessed it. The truth was that he only guessed half of it. That golden blade strengthening gourd named Doliang did indeed contain the most wine in the world. It was the water of the Eastern Sea. Because of this, the water level of the entire Eastern Sea dropped by several feet. Therefore, even a poor scholar couldn't help but praise it and add the last half of his flattery. A small gourd can raise thousands of flood dragons. Dao Zhu is kind, very kind, very kind. Of course, it was also possible that he said this because he had a discussion with the old Daoist and destroyed many of the lotus leaves in the Lotus Grotto heaven. In the Earth God continent, in the temple known as the Orthodox School of Confucianism, the clay saints who still stood tall on the altar definitely wouldn't do such a thing. After destroying other people's things, they still had to pretend to be obedient and act shamelessly. However, this old scholar who had his statue moved out of the temple did it naturally. It was even more natural than the Daoist immortals in the Beko Keikyang building. When they arrived downstairs, the lady boss was smiling like a flower. Handsome, rich, and had a good temperament. The more the lady looked at Chen Pingan, the more she found him pleasing to the eye. Chen Pingan asked for a catty of 5-year-old green plum wine and poured it into the blade-strengthening gourd in front of the lady boss. In the lady boss's eyes, the blade-strengthening gourd was just a red wine gourd. It was so shiny that it could be used as a mirror. It wasn't worth much, but it was obvious that it was a beloved item of at least 2 generations. The lady boss supported her cheek with one hand and sat sideways on the bench. She turned her head to look at the young man who was pouring the wine with steady hands. Her cheeks were slightly red, and the drunkenness hadn't faded. She smiled and asked, "Young master, isn't it easier to drink with a bowl? If you finish this catty of wine, won't you have to fill the gourd again?" Even so, she still brought her own pot of wine over and drank by herself. She didn't forget to bring 3 dishes to go with the wine and 2 pairs of chopsticks. Chen Pingan smiled and said, "That's all I can drink. I'll just drink it all. There's no need to fill it again." The lady boss smiled and said, "Your friend's alcohol tolerance is really good." Chen Pingan blushed with shame. "Wei Xian, you're a founding emperor. Aren't you a bit too embarrassing?" Chen Pingan asked casually, "Since the Yarrow family's border army is so famous at the border, does the lady boss know who the Yarrow family is now?" The lady boss raised her eyebrows and said, "Oh, young master, you're not a spy from Beijing, are you?" Chen Pingan pointed at the building and said, "Is there a spy like me? With a friend who can drink so much? And with a child?" The lady boss nodded and said, "That's true. If Beijing was filled with spies like you, there wouldn't be so many wars to fight. The world would be at peace a long time ago." She was a bit tipsy. She stretched out her arm and tried twice but still couldn't get a piece of meat. Chen Pingan gently pushed the plate towards her. She glanced at him charmingly and put down her chopsticks. "There's no harm in telling you. I'll teach you barbarians from the south how powerful our Daquan border army is. She burped but didn't feel embarrassed. Old General Yarrow, who spent half his life on horseback, is one of our Daquan's top generals. He has 3 sons and 2 daughters. It's a pity that 2 of his sons and 1 of his daughters died. His youngest daughter married into a good family in the capital. Everyone said that they were a match made in heaven. He has a lot of grandchildren and 2 of them are the most promising. His grandson is called Yarrow Shenji. I heard that he joined the army at the age of 10. His granddaughter is called Yarrow Lingji. She's even more amazing. Her talent in martial arts is so good that the entire border has heard of it. Chen Pinggan asked curiously, why do they all end with the word Ji? The lady boss smiled and said, it's the Ji generation. Chen Pinggan was even more confused. Shouldn't the word Ji be used to determine seniority? Could it be that your Daquan is different? The woman said unhappily, how would I know the ancestral rules of the rich Yarrow family? Are rich people not allowed to have a little eccentricity? Chen Pinggan probed, the Yarrow family's iron cavalry is so famous. There must be a lot of people in your Daquan who are jealous, right? The woman rolled her eyes. You're asking me, but who should I ask? Ask His Majesty the Emperor? She chuckled to herself in a seductive manner. That would depend on the old emperor being attracted to my beauty and accepting me into the palace. He's old, but he's still the emperor. Who knows, maybe even his bed frame is made of gold. Perhaps it was because she finally talked about something that made people happy. The woman raised her wine cup and said in a clear voice, the road of life is narrow, and the wine cup is wide. I, Zhonyang, will drink with you. Chen Pinggan's eyes lit up. He raised his cup and said with a smile, I'll remember this. Well said, let's drink. The 2 of them drank the remaining wine in their bowls. A green-robed guest sat on the other side of the threshold. He secretly looked at the man and woman chatting happily at the table. His face was full of resentment as he muttered to himself. A good dog doesn't block the way. A loud voice rang out, and the abject scholar was kicked to the ground. 3 men with sabers strapped to their waists strode into the hall one after another. The man in the lead had a strong body. In the middle of winter, he deliberately exposed some of his chest muscles. He sat on the bench to the left of Chen Pinggan. The man's 2 subordinates went to bring wine and bowls over. The 2 of them sat on the bench and the table. In an instant, the table was full. The strong man refused the white bowl offered by a young saberman. He snatched the bowl in front of the woman and poured the plum wine. The wine splashed everywhere. He drank it in one gulp and wiped his mouth. Suddenly, he covered his stomach with one hand and pointed at the woman with a trembling hand. He said in a trembling voice, there's something wrong with this wine. There's poison in the wine. The 2 young men on the other side of the table immediately pressed on the hilts of their sabers. Their faces were slightly pale. The woman said unhappily, Ma Ping, is there shit in your head? Did you eat too much shit for lunch today? Did the shit happen to be poisonous and your brain got damaged? The man with the saber laughed and returned to normal. It's just a joke. Why are you scolding me? The 2 young colleagues beside him were so scared that they quickly drank to calm themselves down. The man glanced at Chen Pinggan who was in the way. Kid, where are you from? Take out the customs clearance certificate. Just as the woman was about to speak, Chen Pinggan took out the customs clearance certificate and gently placed it on the table in front of the strong man with the saber. After the man picked it up, he looked at the red seals of various sizes and clicked his tongue. There are quite a lot of seals. You've come so far. Chen Pinggan smiled and nodded. The man was angry when he saw him like this. He was used to the people of Hua town groveling and flattering. What's more, he was quite handsome. He wanted to find a way to teach this kid a lesson. He wanted him to know that he was the local snake in Hua town. Even if a tiger came down the mountain to meet Ma Ping, he would have to be obedient. No one would have the right to flirt with the inn's Juniang. The woman suddenly asked, I heard that the town is haunted again. Who's the one who's been possessed this time? Do you know old Liu who only has one arm? He owns a paper money shop and often helps people to look after feng shui. He has completely gone crazy. In this weather, He ran around the streets without any clothes and even said that he was too hot. We had no choice but to lock him up. After a few days, his house was filled with feces and urine, and the stench was overwhelming. He only woke up a little today and finally stopped muttering those strange words. We brothers wanted to hurry over and ask Jonyang for a few bowls of green plum wine to strengthen our young energy and dispel the bad luck. The woman frowned and said, "What should we do? Didn't the master you invited from the county city give you a stack of immortal talisman? How did you brag to me that a talisman can make all ghosts retreat?" The burly man turned his head and spat a mouthful of thick phlegm on the ground. "Bullsh * T master. He's a liar. I've been cheated badly. Constable Han didn't make things difficult for me during this time." Ma Ping exhaled a mouthful of turbid air and forced a smile. He reached out to touch the woman's small hand. The woman quietly withdrew her hand and did not let him have his way. Ma Ping smiled and said, "Jonyang, what do you think of me? I'm more or less a person of status in Hua town, right? I earn a lot of money, have a clean family background, and have practiced martial arts. I have endless strength. Aren't you tempted? Jonyang, don't be ashamed. Your brother Ma is not an old-fashioned person. He doesn't care about your past." The woman chuckled. After that, he tried to take advantage of her a few times under the guise of being drunk, but the woman avoided him. Ma Ping and his two fellow constables ate a table full of dishes. They drank until they were dizzy and ate until their mouths were full of grease. It was obvious that they were here to take advantage of her. In the end, they refused to leave. The three of them went upstairs to sleep, saying that they would return to Hua town the next day. Chen Pinggan had already sat at the table next to them. While the little cripple was cleaning up, the woman sat beside Chen Pinggan. She let out a long sigh as if she was tired. She smiled bitterly and said, "This Ma Ping is the constable of Hua town. His family has been in this line of work for generations. They're only slightly related to the Yamen. It's such a big place. Among the so-called officials, the most important one is just a humble official. The rest are just petty officials. They can't be considered officials, but they're all very arrogant." Pei Qian heard the commotion outside and gently opened the door. He crouched down and stuck his head between the railings on the second floor. He secretly looked at the two fellows downstairs. In the end, he pulled his head out and ran down the stairs. Just as he approached the table, he heard the woman complaining to Chen Pinggan that the officials were difficult to deal with. She said that the constables often came to the inn to eat and drink. She could only spend money to buy her safety. What else could she do? Pei Qian secretly laughed and opened his mouth. After holding it in for a long time, he couldn't hold it in anymore and burst out laughing. "Spend money to buy safety, buy safety. Ouch, I can't take it anymore. I'm dying of laughter. My stomach hurts." Chen Pinggan stood up and came to Pei Qian's side. "Does it hurt?" Pei Qian, whose ear was pulled, immediately stopped laughing and said pitifully, "My stomach doesn't hurt anymore. My ear hurts." The woman was confused. She didn't know what the sneaky skinny little girl was laughing about. Chen Pinggan said goodbye to the woman and pulled Pei Qian's ear all the way to the stairs. Pei Qian tilted his head and stood on his heels, shouting that he didn't dare to do it again. When they reached the stairs, he let go of Pei Qian's ear. When they reached the door of the room, he turned around and ordered Pei Qian, "Don't go out casually." Pei Qian rubbed his ear and nodded. After Chen Pinggan closed the door, Pei Qian stood by the railing and happened to meet the eyes of the woman who looked up at him. Pei Qian snorted coldly and skipped back to his room. He slammed the door with all his strength. Outside the inn, the sun was setting in the west. Someone came riding a horse. It was a budding young girl with a ponytail. She looked gentle and beautiful, but she had a vigorous aura. She carried a horse bow on her back and a saber hanging from her waist. She casually placed the horse outside the door. Obviously, she wasn't worried that it would get lost. The green-robed man was still playing with the dog outside the door. The young girl looked at the man without a heart. After she entered the lobby, she looked around. When she saw the surprised woman, she was a little unhappy. She stopped and said to the woman, "Grandpa wants me to tell you not to open the inn for a while. It's not safe here." In front of the young girl, the woman didn't have the slightest bit of charm. She was dignified like a lady from a noble family. She put a finger to her mouth, indicating that the walls had ears. Then she said softly, "Lingji, I'm used to staying here." The young girl said angrily, "You don't know what's good for you." The woman smiled and asked, "Do you want to drink some plum wine?" The young girl's face was full of anger. "Drink." The woman also knew that she had said something wrong and was a little ashamed. The young girl said coldly, "Give me a room. I'll leave tomorrow. Think about it carefully." The little cripple led the young girl to the second floor, trembling with fear. Under the eyes of the lady boss, he specially picked the cleanest and most elegant room for the young girl. After the light footsteps completely disappeared, Chen Pingan stacked the remaining 6 grain rain coins together. One by one, he threw them into the picture scroll. When the 3rd grain rain coin entered the picture, Chen Pingan stood up and slowly took a few steps back. An old man with a hunched back staggered out of the picture scroll. He jumped off the table and smiled at Chen Pingan. He turned around and stretched out his hand to touch the painting, but he touched nothing. Even Pei Qian had secretly touched the painting, but for Zhu Lian, it was close at hand, yet far at the end of the sky. It was illusory and untouchable. Zhu Lian wasn't flustered and exasperated. He laughed and said, "Sure enough. Young master, is this the magic of the immortals in the world?" Chen Pingan nodded, sort of. This old man with his habitual hunched back seemed to be completely different from the rumor of the martial arts madman who was possessed by the devil. The old man always had a smile on his face and a kind expression. In the lotus flower blessed land, this person almost turned the whole Jianghu upside down. Ding Ying, who came later, was also the #1 person in the world and had an extremely distinct grandmaster aura. This probably had something to do with Ding Ying's tall stature, serious manner, and wearing a silver lotus crown. The martial arts madman named Zhu Lian in front of him was far inferior. Compared to Wei Xian, who kept everything to himself, Zhu Lian seemed more resigned and frank. He said frankly, "Now that I've arrived at young master's hometown, it will take me a few days just to get used to the flow of qi in the world. It's even harder to say if I want to recover to the peak of my cultivation when I was alive. Well, according to young master's words, I should be at the 6th realm of pure martial arts." At this point, the old man laughed at himself. "I may break through the realm in one go, or I may be stagnant. I may even be consumed by the spiritual energy here and my cultivation will be nibbled away. However, I have a feeling that after the big threshold of the 7th realm, it won't be too big of a problem to become a martial artist of the 8th or 9th realm." Zhu Lian got straight to the point. That taciturn Wei Xian was indeed much more straightforward. Zhu Lian walked to the window and opened it. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He said to himself, "This 7th realm is a bit like the martial artists of Lotus Blossom Blessed Land going from Hutian to Xiantian. It's the most difficult step to cross. As long as I can reach the 7th realm of martial arts, I believe that my cultivation will only increase over the years. I can't say for sure that I'll reach the 9th realm, but reaching the 8th realm is definitely not difficult." Zhu Lian turned his head and smiled. "Of course, as long as I can get used to the rich spiritual energy here, I still have a chance to fight a martial artist of the 7th realm to a draw. I won't be suppressed by the realm and can only wait for death when we meet. As for a battle of the same realm, as long as it's not young master, my chances of winning are great." Chen Pingan murmured, "Is the threshold only at the 7th realm?" The old man sat back at the table and tapped a finger on the table. "I'm willing to serve young master loyally for 30 years. I hope that young master can give me freedom after that. How about it?" Chen Pingan smiled and shook his head. "I don't know how to restore your freedom." The old man was stunned. He fell into silence and stared at the picture scroll. Chen Pingan guessed that the picture scroll itself was similar to Lizhu Grotto Heaven's natal porcelain. Even if you were a cultivator of the 5th realm, you would still be controlled. Thinking of this, Chen Pingan smiled. On the other side, Wei Xian was as drunk as mud. He was lying on the bed and talking in his sleep. Even though there's no killing intent in his body, his killing intent is everywhere. There was a knock on the door. Chen Pingan put away the last 3 grain rain coins and the picture scroll. He was about to open the door when Julian did it for him. Pei Qian blinked and quickly ran far away from Julian to Chen Ping'an's back. Julian closed the door and turned around with a smile. The little girl's foundation is really good. Is she young master's daughter? Pei Qian nodded vigorously. Chen Ping'an shook his head and turned to ask, is there something you need from me? Pei Qian looked at Julian and shook his head. Julian was tactful and asked with a smile, young master, do you have a place to stay? Chen Ping'an said, out of the door, the second room on the right is the one. But Wei Xian lives there. If you don't want to live with others, I'll help you find another room. In the Jianghu, there's no need to pay attention to these things. Julian waved his hand and rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Young master, did you choose the founding emperor of Nanyuan first? Chen Ping'an nodded and warned, the two of you, don't get into a fight because of personal feelings. Julian smiled. Wei Xian is the enemy of 10,000 people. I admire him very much. I can't wait to toast to him. Why would I make him unhappy? Julian walked out of the room and closed the door softly. When there was only a small gap left, Julian suddenly asked, may I ask how much young master spent for me? Chen Ping'an answered, 17 grain rain coins. Julian smiled, I've let young master spend. After the old man left, Pei Qian was still worried and went to lock the door. Only then did she feel relieved. Chen Ping'an asked, you're not afraid of Wei Xian's face every day? Julian is so amiable, why are you so afraid? Pei Qian said softly, I'm afraid. Chen Ping'an asked again, what is it? Pei Qian said softly, I think that lady boss is not a good person. Adding a little cripple and an old hunchback, how strange. Could this be a black shop? The storyteller under the bridge told stories. He said that black shops like to drug their customers and then use them to make human meat buns. Chen Ping'an laughed angrily, don't think too much. Go back and read. Pei Qian sighed and left. Chen Ping'an was not in the mood to flip through the remaining 2 scrolls. Lu Baixiang, Sui Yu. One of them did not dare to come out of the mountain, afraid that it was easier to invite a god than to send him away. The other, even more so. Thinking of Pei Qian's impression of Wei Xian and Julian. Actually, her intuition was not wrong. The way Wei Xian looked at people was from a high position to a low position. After all, he was the ruler of a country. The way Julian looked at people was like a living person looking at a dead person. His eyes were dark and gloomy, like a deep pool. The smile on the old man's face was not to be taken seriously. At the threshold of the inn, the green-robed visitor had his back to the main hall. He looked up at the gorgeous sunset and gently patted his knees. Every time he drank a mouthful of green plum wine, he would nag. Seeing a dragon in the depths of the clouds, encountering a deer in the depths of the forest, a beauty beside a peach blossom, a hero on the battlefield, a famous scholar in a humble alley, bang, the green-robed visitor was knocked to the ground and fell flat on his face. However, he did not forget to hold the wine pot tightly. The little cripple kicked him in the back and said angrily, are you done? Are you addicted? I've tolerated you for a long time. The man stood up awkwardly and patted the dust off his body. He said in a low voice, do you know who I am? The little cripple looked at the somewhat unfamiliar poor scholar and felt a little guilty. He braced himself and shouted loudly, who are you? The green-robed visitor said seriously, what did you call Juniang? The little cripple was stunned, Lady Boss. The green-robed visitor asked again, then, who is Lady Boss's husband to you? The little cripple almost went crazy with anger. He dashed out of the threshold and used both his fists and legs to chase after this bastard whose surname he only knew was Zhong. The man raised the wine pot high and dodged in all directions. As he fled, he drank. He suffered a few punches and kicks, but it did not hurt at all. The sun was setting in the west. There was a prophecy about the scholar. The scholar himself did not take the prophecy seriously. Before Zhong Mao left the mountain, all ghosts in the world were fearless. 3:35. After the sun set over the western mountains, the twilight deepened. Borrowing the last bit of lingering light, the green-robed visitor, who was playing around with the little cripple, stopped and looked toward the end of the road to the south. The little cripple took the opportunity to punch him on the shoulder. The downtrodden scholar swayed and ignored him. The little cripple was a little better. He followed the scholar's line of sight and looked into the distance. He didn't see anything and thought the scholar was deliberately interrupting him. The little cripple was about to continue punching him so that he wouldn't dare to tease the lady boss in the future. The young man's heart suddenly trembled. He lay on the ground with his ears pressed to the ground and his expression grave. It was a cavalry, and their numbers were not small. In Hua town, other than the occasional courier who passed by, there had never been a large cavalry troop that showed up. The young people of Hua town, in order to admire the Yarrow family's iron cavalry, often went to the distant Guajia army town in groups. Iron armor, war horses, light crossbows, and war sabers. In the eyes of the poor children of Hua town, these were the most manly objects in the world. The little cripple was no exception. It was just that his peers in Hua town didn't like to play with him. At this moment, the little cripple left the green-robed visitor to the side and went to the main hall to report to the lady boss. The lady yawned and only said that she understood. These soldiers definitely looked down on their inn and Hua town. They were most likely marching through the night to the Guajia army town in the north. There was no need to pay them any mind. The little cripple made a no sound and immediately ran out of the inn. He climbed onto the roof of the inn and reached out to cover his forehead. He raised his eyes and looked into the distance. Taking advantage of the fact that the sky wasn't completely dark and he could barely see things, he wanted to see the attire of the Border Army Iron Cavalry up close. The next time the lady boss ordered him to go to Hua town to buy oil and rice, he would be able to show off to his peers. Dust could be faintly seen in the distance along the road. The heavy tremors of the earth became clearer and clearer. However, the sky waited for no man. The little cripple was a little anxious and quickly climbed down the roof. He went to the main hall and asked the lady boss if he could hang up lanterns. The lady glared at him. Who would pay for the candles if he hung up the lanterns so early? The little cripple patted his chest and said, "I'll pay for it. If not, the old hunchback will pay for it." The lady nodded. The little cripple happily went to hang 2 large red lanterns outside the inn. Just as he was about to climb up the roof, he saw a rider slightly detour from the official road and silently appeared outside the inn. He was wearing bright and gorgeous armor, different from the plain style of the Yarrow army. The rider took his helmet and held it in front of his chest and asked indifferently, "Do you sell green plum wine?" The little cripple. The cavalryman said in a deep voice, "In the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, get the innkeeper to empty the entire inn, then prepare 5 tables of food and bring out the best green plum wine. You will be reimbursed for all expenses. If the green plum wine is really as good as the rumors say, there will be a great reward. Remember, after entering the inn, we will send people to check the rooms. If anyone dares to linger, kill them without mercy. After we leave, all the guests can go back to their rooms." The rider put on his helmet again, turned his horse around, and galloped away. The little cripple's face was lifeless. The green-robed traveler squatted alone at the entrance of the inn. The dog had already returned to its nest, but he still didn't have a place to stay. Seeing that the youth was still in a daze, he reminded him, "Hurry up and tell Zhonyang. If you anger these nobles, the inn won't be able to continue operating." The little cripple hurriedly ran into the main hall and found that the woman had already met with the old hunchback and was discussing something. Once the little cripple arrived, he would be the one to take the lead and explain the situation to the guests in the inn. He would have to trouble them to quickly leave the inn to avoid a bloody disaster. The little cripple was in a difficult position. The lady waved her hand and said that the candles were waved. The little cripple immediately rushed to the 2nd floor. The first room belonged to Chen Pingan. The little cripple explained the situation to the guest who opened the door. Chen Pingan didn't care. He smiled and said that he would come to the other 2 rooms to greet them. The little cripple thanked him and hurriedly left. Pei Qian opened the door. An oil lamp was lit on the table, and a book was spread out. She smiled and said, "I'm reading." Chen Pingan didn't expose her little trick. In fact, Pei Qian had been eavesdropping on Julian and Chen Pingan. When she heard the knock on the door, She took out the book from her bag and pretended to read it in front of Chen Pingan. Chen Pingan asked her to pack up and leave the inn temporarily. In the room next door, Zhu Lian had already opened the door. He smiled at Chen Pingan and said, Wei Xian went back to sleep after opening the door. Should I wake him up for the young master? Just as Zhu Lian was about to turn around, Wei Xian, who reeked of alcohol, sat up and rubbed his forehead. He said to the two, "He's awake." Ma Ping and the other two constables of Hua Town heard that the cavalry was passing by. They cursed and swore, but still obediently left the room. The girl with a ponytail stood outside the railing. She lived in the room at the end of the corridor on the second floor. At this moment, she stared at the lady on the first floor of the lobby. "Is this how your inn treats its guests? I've really learned something. At the border, there's actually someone who dares to be so unreasonable under the eyes of the Yarrow family's cavalry. I'd like to see who it is that can chase people out of the inn with just a few words." The girl supported herself with one hand on the railing and directly jumped down from the second floor. Ma Ping and the other two's eyelids twitched. Where did such a tough little girl come from? The lady smiled bitterly, wanting to say something but hesitating. The old hunchback held his pipe and thought for a moment. "I'll go tell them. We open the door to welcome guests. There's no need to distinguish between rich and poor." The old man walked straight out of the inn, his figure disappearing into the boundless night. The lady faced the two groups of guests on the second floor and said apologetically, "Later on, all of you can stay in your rooms. Tonight's matter is our inn's fault. After this, we'll give each of you a jar of 5-year-old plum wine." The girl rose from the ground and returned to the second floor, slamming the door shut. Ma Ping and the other two resentfully returned to their rooms. Chen Pingan had Wei Xian and Zhu Lian sit in his room for a while. Pei Qian naturally didn't need to be mentioned. The lady had the little cripple go out, but had the scholar surnamed Zhong pick a room on the second floor so that he wouldn't be an eyesore. The green-robed traveler picked a room on the second floor and then leaned against the railing. The lady stretched out a finger and waved it at him. "Get in the room." The scholar said worriedly, "Zhonyang, you're so beautiful. Won't those soldiers be tempted by you? After drinking wine, it's easier for them to lose their minds after drinking." The lady smiled. "When the time comes, you'll be the hero who saves the beauty. If I'm blind, maybe I'll repay you with my body." He waved his hand. Taking advantage of others is not what a gentleman would do. "Zhonyang, don't worry. We scholars are all righteous and have a stomach full of wisdom. As long as I stand here, no matter how much wine they drink, they won't have any evil thoughts." Before the lady could say anything, the girl surnamed Yarrow in the distant room had already opened the door. She unsheathed her saber halfway, making a melodious sound. She sternly said to the scholar, "Pervert, shut up." It was obvious that the girl's saber was much more effective than the little cripple's fists and feet. The scholar immediately entered the room without saying a word. The more this was the case, the more disappointed the girl was with the lady downstairs. All year long, she hung out with these men, drinking and laughing with them. What was the difference between her and those brothel girls? After entering the room, the girl leaned against the table and started sobbing. The lady stood behind the counter and sighed. She poured herself a bowl of plum wine. Plop! The lady looked up and saw the scholar jump down from the second floor and fall to the ground. After getting up, he walked to the counter and smiled. "Zhonyang, just think of me as the bookkeeper. I'm worried if I'm too far away from you." The scholar smiled gently. The lady was stunned and replied, "But you're so ugly. If you get too close, I'll feel disgusted." The scholar looked as if he was struck by lightning. He squatted on the ground and held his head. It turned out that the whisperings of those scholars and beauties novels were all lies. There was no need to care about them at all. The hunchbacked old man took the lead and walked into the inn. A group of people followed behind him. Probably because the other party was reasonable, they didn't chase away the guests on the second floor, nor did they rush into the 5 tables. The person in the lead was a middle-aged man wearing a red python robe. He had a pale face and no beard, and he had an imposing aura. There were 2 people behind the man in the python robe. One of them was wearing a silver armor with cloud patterns. When he walked, the armor clanked. The other person was 70 years old. He wore a brocade robe and a laurel on his head. He had the air of a transcendent being. The 7 or 8 people behind him should be his trusted retainers. The 3 of them sat at one table while the other retainers sat at 2 tables. Among the retainers, there was an inconspicuous young man with a jade pendant hanging on his waist. When he saw the lady, he smiled. Outside the inn, there was a total of 700 to 800 elite cavalrymen and a dozen carriages. In each carriage, there was a prisoner and 2 people watching over them. Without exception, the people watching over them were all level 5 Qi refinement warriors from the Great Quan dynasty. The hunchbacked old man frowned. The old man truly did not expect these people. This group of guests was not giving face to an old man like him, they were giving face to the Yarrow clan. As for the 80,000 Yarrow clan cavalry and the southern conquering general's face, they had only reduced the number of people from 5 tables to 3 tables. That was all. As for why the guests on the second floor were not chased away, it was because a young retainer casually mentioned that the more people there were, the livelier it would be to drink. After that, the insufferably arrogant eunuch in the python robe agreed with a smile. The general in the silver armor looked towards the lady and ordered, "Serve the green plum wine first. Hurry up and follow up with the food." The hunchbacked old man lifted the curtain and went to the kitchen to get busy. The little cripple began to serve the wine to the 3 tables. On the first floor of the inn, the atmosphere was heavy. There was almost only the sound of wine being poured. Suddenly, someone raised his hand and greeted the lady, smiling. "Lady boss, may I trouble you to pour a bowl of wine for our brothers personally? I heard that the green plum wine was passed down from your ancestors and was brewed by you personally. Of course, you have to pour the wine personally." With the young man taking the lead, the retainers at the table instantly lost their scruples and burst into laughter. The lady picked up a jar of green plum wine and was about to pour it with a smile. However, for some reason, the lady's body tensed up. After running the inn for so many years, she had seen all sorts of people in the pugilistic world. She had even seen many immortals and Qi refinement warriors. However, when she met the eyes of the young retainer, she actually felt a little fearful. It was as though an ordinary person had encountered a ghost in the dark. A sense of helplessness arose from the depths of her heart. Suddenly, the green-robed guest grabbed the lady and laughed loudly. "Zhenyang is not feeling well today. As the accountant, can I pour the wine for our distinguished guests?" The young retainer seemed to have heard the funniest joke in the world as he looked around. "Brothers, what do you think?" Everyone said no. Only then did the young retainer look at the green-robed scholar. "No, what should we do? Or should we let the lady boss pour the wine herself? It's just pouring wine. We don't need your Zhenyang to accompany us to the hanged troops town, right?" The eunuch wearing the red python robe turned a deaf ear to him. On the other hand, the old immortal master wearing the laurel robe smiled slightly. The young lady, Yarrow Lingji, opened the door and said with an ashen face, "No." The young retainer stood up, appearing to be a crane in a flock of chickens. He raised his head and asked with a smile, "Why?" The young lady only had to look at this person to feel a little anxious. She subconsciously held onto the hilt of her saber and said without thinking, "This is the Yarrow family's territory." Yarrow Lingji did not know that the moment she held onto the hilt of her saber, all the retainers on the first floor had a murderous intent. The silver-armored general sitting beside the eunuch in the python robe and the laurel robe was even more murderous. The young retainer had been craning his neck to look at the second floor, but he seemed to have seen everything on the first floor. He stretched out his hand and pressed it down lightly, indicating for everyone not to act rashly. Then, he smiled and said, "But the entire Great Quan dynasty is my family's territory. What should we do? Does your Yarrow family want to rebel?" The woman carried the wine jar and walked out of the counter. She first said to the young lady in a deep voice, "Lingji, return to your room." Then, she bowed to the young retainer and said, "Zhenyang will pour the wine for the young master." The young retainer smirked and stared at the woman's face. He pointed at the young lady on the second floor and said, "How about you and your mother come together?" The woman's face turned pale. A door opened on the second floor, and a young man in a white robe walked out. I don't think so. The young retainer turned his head and looked at that person with a playful expression. Oh, who do you think you are? This time, someone on the first floor helped Chen Pinggan answer. Who do you think you are? It was that down-and-out scholar with the surname Zhong. The young retainer sighed. All right, tonight, there are so many people who want to make things difficult for me. The tavern owner who doesn't want to drive away the guests, the lady boss who doesn't want to pour wine, the young lady of the Yarrow family who speaks arrogantly, the foreigner who wears a white robe and thinks he's a sword immortal, the scholar who wears a green robe and thinks he's a Confucian sage. He suddenly looked at the woman and then at the young lady on the second floor. He smiled and said, "It doesn't matter. The two of you can try to save the Yarrow family tonight. If I'm in a good mood, I might be able to help pull the Yarrow family out of the fire pit." The woman took a deep breath and seemed to have made up her mind. She turned to the down-and-out scholar and said, "Zhong Kuei, this matter has nothing to do with you. I know you have some skills, so you can leave now. Don't worry about us." Then, she looked up at Chen Pinggan and was about to speak. Chen Pinggan smiled and asked, "Lady boss, what was the saying earlier?" The woman was somewhat puzzled and fell silent for a moment. Chen Pinggan muttered to himself, "The road of the human world is narrow, and the wine cup is wide." The road was narrow, so they would meet the Yarrow family who had something to do with the locust tree leaf. The road was narrow, so they would also meet these fellows who couldn't wait for others to die. But it didn't matter. The plum wine here was delicious. Chen Pinggan said softly, "Today, I'll have to trouble the four of you." Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, 4 people walked out from the room behind the white-clothed young man on the second floor. The founding emperor of the Nanyuan kingdom was the first to walk out. He said with a straight face, "No need to be so polite." The martial madman Zhu Lian then walked out with a bow and stood on the other side of Chen Pinggan. He put his hands behind his back and said with a smile, "Young master, your words are unnecessary." A beautiful woman carrying the sword Infatuation on her back stood beside Wei Xian. She was the woman from the Lotus Flower Blessed Land, Sword Immortal Sui Yu. She said with a cold expression, "Thank you for lending me the sword." Finally, the burly founder of the demon sect, Lu Baixiang, stood beside Zhu Lian with a saber in his hands. He smiled and said, "My lord, this saber is not bad. Stopping snow, the name is also good." Finally, a soft and weak voice sounded, "Father, what about me?" Chen Pinggan was somewhat helpless and said, "Go back to your room and read." The skinny little girl made no sound. After gently closing the door, she loudly read the teachings of the sages in the book to her. The scholar on the first floor listened to the sound of reading on the second floor. Other than the sound of reading, there were also Chen Pinggan, Wei Xian, Zhu Lian, Sui Yu, and Lu Baixiang on the second floor. 336. The small inns at the border were filled with all sorts of people tonight. After the 5 people walked out of the house, Yarrow Lingji's breathing became heavy. This made her feel incredulous. Her fear of the young retainer was more of an intuition that was mixed with many complicated emotions. When a weak woman faced a man with evil intentions, the inferior woman would revere the invisible power. There were also those who were kind by nature who would instinctively avoid evil people. However, when Yarrow Lingji looked at the 5 people on the same floor, her suffocation was very direct. In the same forest, the rabbit and deer would flee when they saw the tiger. In the same river, the fish and shrimps would meet the dragon. Yarrow Lingji had been a scout for the border army for 3 years and had been in 2 life and death battles. Yarrow Lingji had never thought of backing down. Logically speaking, she should not feel this way. She was the most outstanding martial arts genius in this generation of the Yarrow family. She was only 14 years old but had already reached Realm 4 and had the potential to break through the bottleneck. Regardless of whether it was a 15-year-old Realm 5 martial artist or a 17-year-old Realm 5 martial artist, they were all worthy of the word genius. In the Great Quan dynasty, regardless of whether it was the army or the pugilistic world, Yarrow Lingji was a top-notch unpolished jade. With a little polishing, she could shine brightly. No one doubted that she could successfully reach the wind-controlling realm in the future and become a powerful martial arts master. Especially experts who were born in the army, their killing power was especially great. This was undeniable. In the pugilistic world, grandmasters often fought in pairs. Most of them were evenly matched. On the battlefield, the pursuit was to fight against 100 or 1,000 people. Yarou Lingji clenched an item that looked like a silver ingot in her hand. It was the invaluable armor of the military school. Furthermore, it was the Ju armor that was ridiculed by the Qi refinement warriors in the mountains as the pond armor. It was the pond armor golden crow warp and weft armor that was a grade higher in quality. It was a true immortal treasure. From this, it could be seen that the Yarou family of the border army had high expectations of Yarou Lingji. The young retainer looked at the 5 people on the second floor. He slammed the table and pretended to be angry. "Are you trying to scare me because you have more people?" When the young man said this, there was a smile on his face. There were 3 tables of people in the inn and hundreds of elite cavalry outside. Probably because he felt that he was a little shameless, he could not help but laugh out loud. The 2 tables of elite retainers who looked like retainers also laughed along. They did not take the commotion on the second floor seriously. Although the people on the second floor had a strong aura and were even a little intimidating, so what? He was just a boorish man. The Jianghu people of the Great Spring Dynasty had long lost their backbone. They were just a bunch of lackeys lying in front of the temple, wagging their tails and begging for mercy. And the person who had personally broken the backbone of the entire Jianghu happened to be sitting at a table in the inn today. Those who came did not come with good intentions. The innkeeper, nicknamed Zhonyang, didn't let out a sigh of relief because of Chen Ping'an's appearance. Instead, her mood became even heavier. Third Master had already announced his name, yet the other party was still so overbearing. It was obvious that they were here for the Yarou character. Once there was a dispute, he was afraid that the other party would take action. At that time, the Yarou family would be in a difficult position. The old hunchback nodded to the woman behind the curtain. The woman smiled bitterly. The other party clearly had ulterior motives. Perhaps he wanted to stir up trouble and wanted to drag the entire Yarou family down with him. She clearly knew that the Yarou family was currently in a state of turmoil, and that it was better to be quiet than to move. As for her and the inn, they could only endure as much as they could. However, she couldn't persuade the people on the second floor to retreat. The other party was kind enough to stand up for you, but you wanted him to be a coward instead. This woman really couldn't do such a thing. The green-robed scholar was puzzled. "These people are..." The woman smiled bitterly. "They are nobles from the capital. We can't afford to offend them." The scholar hesitated for a long time and was about to speak. The woman said helplessly, "Zhong Kuei, I beg you. Don't make trouble. Things are very troublesome now. I'm not in the mood to deal with you." The scholar sighed and shut his mouth. Chen Ping'an looked down at the lobby on the first floor and asked, "Bullying a woman like the innkeeper, isn't that not very kind?" The young retainer smiled and said, "We're here to do business and pour a few cups of wine for our customers." "How is that bullying?" Chen Ping'an pointed at the young man's heart. "Ask yourself." The young man was stunned at first. Then, he picked up the wine bowl and drank a big mouthful. He wiped his mouth and smiled. "If Master Chu of the academy said this, I would definitely think twice. As for you, are you worthy?" Chen Ping'an said with a smile, "Logic is logic. Is there a need to talk about who says it? Aren't you bullying the weak and fearing the strong? I believe that as long as your fist is hard, you'll listen to reason no matter what, right?" The young man nodded. "I've heard these words. They do make sense." Then, he threw the wine bowl and raised his arm high. He opened his fingers and gently clenched his fist. "Then whose fist is harder? I'd like to see how many people in the Great Spring region dare to arm wrestle with me." The woman was worried that Chen Ping'an was young and impetuous. He would be in the wrong if he made the first move. She quickly reminded him, "Young master, don't be impulsive. These people were ordered to leave the capital. They have an imperial edict. If you make the first move, you won't be able to explain yourself." The young retainer's eyes were gloomy. He turned to the woman. "Shut up. What right does a broken widow have to interrupt? Do you know who I am?" The woman's face was pale. The young retainer pointed at Zhonyang and then at Chen Pinggan and the others on the second floor. He sneered. Zhonyang of the Yarrow family secretly colluded with the Jianghu people of other countries and tried to steal the prisoner carriage. She is guilty of the most heinous crime. The woman was inconsolable. Finally, she cursed, "Who are you, you little bastard?" The young man pointed at himself and said innocently, "Me? Little bastard." He coughed and straightened his clothes. He smiled and said, "According to what Madame Yarrow said, Gao Shuzhen is really an old bastard. Haha, don't you think it's funny? When I get home, I'll tell this joke to Gao Shuzhen." Madame Zhonyang and the hunchbacked third master looked at each other. They were both shocked. Duke Shen, Gao Shuzhen. He was the only remaining duke of the Great Quan dynasty and was highly relied on by the current emperor. The Great Quan dynasty had been peaceful for a long time. The Liu family had ruled for 200 years. At the beginning of the dynasty, they were bestowed with nobility from outside the family. In total, they were bestowed with the titles of 3 princes and 7 dukes. However, only the line of Duke Shen remained hereditary. The others had already lost the rice bowls that their ancestors had fought for with their lives. Duke Shen only had one son, an old one. It was the junior duke, Gao Shuyi. This guy was famous in the capital for being a domineering prince. He enjoyed a good reputation in the court. Time and time again, he relied on the shadow of his ancestors to get into big trouble. However, every time, he came out unscathed. The emperor treated Gao Shuyi with tolerance that none of the other princes and princesses could compare. Therefore, there was a saying in the capital's officialdom, when the junior duke left the manor, the earth would shake and the mountains would shake. How could such a notorious disciple participate in this trip to the south? Although the emperor favored the line of Duke Shen, with the emperor's wisdom, he would never treat it so lightly. In the Great Quan dynasty, the person who was least afraid of getting into trouble was probably this lawless Gao Shuyi. After Gao Shuyi bullied his eldest grandson, the general Song Xiao, who was also the minister of war, could only curse Gao Shuyi as a shit-stirrer. On the second floor, Wei Xian softly explained the background of Duke Shen to Chen Pinggan. Chen Pinggan nodded. When everyone thought that he would retreat in the face of difficulties, in the blink of an eye, he shrank from the second floor and arrived in front of the junior duke. On the road outside the inn, a horseman who sat behind a coachman was chewing dry food that was hard to swallow. Occasionally, he picked up the water bottle and drank a few mouthfuls. He raised his head and saw a carrier pigeon fly up from behind the inn. Immediately, someone rushed over and waited for the horseman's order. A handsome, snow-white falcon perched on the man's shoulder. The horseman waved his hand. "Don't bother." The man silently retreated. The horseman was the one who first came to the inn to deliver the message. The coachman beside him straightened his back and did not dare to move. An old man lifted the curtain and asked with a smile, "Your Highness, why don't you follow us into the inn?" The man smiled and shook his head. Self-discipline was a great skill. For people who were born in the royal family, it was not difficult to control people. They had been influenced since childhood and could learn from history. 2 chi cultivators, one old and one young, were sitting cross-legged in the carriage. They were responsible for escorting the most important prisoner to the Mirage City in the capital of the Great Quan dynasty. The person who spoke to the horseman was an old man wearing a purple Taoist robe and a fishtail crown. He held the end of a rope in one hand and a horsetail whisk in the other. The prisoner's hair was disheveled and his body was covered in blood. He lowered his head and did not speak. His face could not be seen clearly. His golden robe was tattered. His wrists and ankles were nailed with a Vajra pestle. In addition, his neck was tied with a black rope. One end of the rope was held in the old cultivator's hand. The most miserable part of the prisoner was between his eyebrows. A flying sword pierced through his head. The tip of the sword came out from the back of his head and stabbed into his head. This prisoner was an orthodox god of mountains and rivers. He was once a chi cultivator at the peak of the 7th realm. In his territory, his cultivation was at least at the 8th realm. He was the king of mountains and rivers and had the power to fight against a 9th realm golden core. However, He did not know why he was reduced to such a state. In addition to the old man from the Taoist sect, there was also a young woman in the carriage. She looked at the horseman with eyes full of love. Although she did not speak, her meaning was obvious. The woman's appearance could only be considered delicate. However, her temperament was outstanding and her skin was whiter than snow. She was a beauty in the eyes of ordinary people. After all, in the eyes of mountain cultivators, beauty in the mortal world was ultimately a stinky skin bag. Her skin was rough and there were all kinds of strange smells. If one looked carefully, they were all flaws. The horseman suddenly turned his head and looked in the direction of the inn. He seemed to be a little surprised. The old man revealed a hint of surprise. What a shocking martial aura. And there are so many of them. A small inn at the border has so many hidden talents. Could it be that the young High Duke has hit the jackpot? Are the masters of the North Jin Kingdom going all out to kidnap the prisoner? The woman asked tentatively, "Do you want me to remind the High Duke?" The horseman shook his head and smiled. "We are already in the territory of the Dequan Kingdom. Unless the Yarrow family is rebelling, there is no danger." The old man in the Taoist robe's eyes flashed, but he did not say anything. After a while, just as the old immortal master was about to speak, the horseman had already jumped off the carriage and went straight to the inn. After the horseman left, the young woman from the mountain deity family asked softly, "Master, the young High Duke is forcing the Yarrow family. His Highness did not restrain them. Is it really okay?" The old man waved his hand and said, "Everyone in the world can rebel, but not the Yarrow family. They have been loyal to the country for a long time." The old man sneered, "But it will be addictive." The prisoner still had his head down and laughed happily. "When it comes to loyal officials and the cornerstone of the border, you actually treat them as a joke. Even if the Dequan Kingdom is temporarily in power, what can you do? How dare you still be so stubborn?" The old immortal master shook his wrist and the rope instantly tightened around the prisoner's neck. The prisoner trembled all over and clenched his teeth, refusing to make any sound. In the inn, a strange phenomenon suddenly occurred. A man in a white robe appeared in the hall without warning. The young High Duke, Gao Shuyi, sensed that something was wrong and was about to retreat in fear. But in a flash, his shoulder was already grabbed by the man. The three people at the other table, except for the eunuch who was still drinking, turned a blind eye to this. Immortal Master Laurel and the silver-armored general had already stood up abruptly. They wanted to save Gao Shuyi, but they both stopped. This was because there was a scarlet long sword from the second floor that was suspended between the two tables. The tip of the sword was pointed directly at Immortal Master Laurel. The silver-armored general stopped and turned his head to look. Someone on the second floor had moved a few steps to the side with a smile on his face. The narrow blade in his hand stopped in the snow and was about to be unsheathed. The short man jumped over the railing and landed on the threshold of the inn on the first floor. It seemed that he was going to stop the hundreds of riders outside by himself. The stooped old man squatted on the railing and lowered his head with a smile, staring at the eunuch who was the calmest. The middle-aged eunuch in the red robe looked like he was in his 30s, but in fact, he was already 80 years old. He was one of the martial arts grandmasters of the Great Spring Dynasty and was known as the pagoda scholar of the Great Spring Imperial City. After he became famous, there were no longer any strange rumors in the Great Spring Imperial City, which had always been haunted by ghosts. However, the real power of this senior eunuch was that he had recruited a large number of Jianghu henchmen and wiped out more than a dozen top martial arts sects in the Great Spring Dynasty one by one. In 3 years, the whole Jianghu was set off a bloody storm. Both the good and the evil had tried to assassinate this old eunuch many times, but without exception, none of them returned. There were 2 people at the same table with the eunuch. Immortal Master Laurel was called Shu Tong. He was the current master of the Tsaomu Nunnery, the first immortal sect in the Great Spring Dynasty. He was good at thunder magic and could order ghosts and gods for his own use. He was also a medical expert and proficient in refining elixirs. The elixirs he refined were crazily sought by the rich and powerful officials of the Great Spring Dynasty. The silver-armored general, Shu Qingju, was one of the few top masters in the Great Spring Army. He was less than 40 years old, but his Henkung Fu had reached the peak. The saber darchiao on his waist was also a military treasure. It could be said that it was good at both offense and defense. Every time he broke through the enemy lines on the battlefield, he would take the lead and be invincible. Jiao Shuyi ran his qi and struggled for a while, but it was useless. Instead of being afraid, he smiled even more. Is your Yarrow family really going to rebel? The man slightly increased his strength. Jiao Shuyi felt a burst of pain, but he still tried to maintain his smile. The man said to him, I'm just a passerby. Since you like to provoke me so much, then after I kill you, I'll just escape to the northern Jin kingdom. As for whether the Yarrow family belongs to the Yarrow family or not, you can slander me however you like. I don't care. Who would believe such a nonsense? Jiao Shuyi grimaced, sweat oozing from his forehead. Kill me if you can. Chen Pinggan stared at him. Jiao Shuyi whispered to Chen Pinggan in an extremely soft voice, do you know that the mother and daughter are lucky? Otherwise, after the Yarrow family's property was confiscated, they would be sent to the musical house soon and become promiscuous official prostitutes. At that time, you can also have a taste of it. As soon as the young duke finished speaking, Chen Pinggan's fist arrived. It directly hit Jiao Shuyi's forehead. It was so powerful that it was like a boulder attacking a city. Jiao Shuyi's head swung back. Although the jade pendant on his waist lit up with a burst of colorful brilliance and instantly gathered on his forehead, he was still hit by this punch and fainted on the spot, foaming at the mouth. After the punch, cracks appeared on the amulet jade pendant. Because his shoulder was always held by Chen Pinggan, Jiao Shuyi's head swung back and forth like a swing. Chen Pinggan's second punch hit the man. Pull one hair and the whole body will be affected. There was a bang. The young eunuch put down his chopsticks heavily and said in a soft voice, Young man, it's about time. Although he didn't have a good impression of Jiao Shuyi, he couldn't let Jiao Shuyi beat him to death right under his nose. After the eunuch spoke, the immortal master Shu Tong and the military general Shu Qingju were relieved. But the man still didn't stop his punch. Jiao Shuyi's ancestral jade pendant shattered with a bang. As the jade pendant shattered, Jiao Shuyi woke up. His face was flushed and his eyes were bloodshot. He said with a ferocious expression, Son of a bitch, I will definitely make you and the Yarrow family die without a burial ground. The eunuch in a bright red robe suddenly stood up, furious. How many years had it been since someone dared to be so presumptuous in front of him? The lady boss screamed, Stop. Chen Pinggan turned his head to look. The woman shook her head lightly. Her eyes were full of anxiety. She wanted to say something but didn't dare to. She could only mutter, Young master, if you have something to say, let's sit down and talk. I believe that the young duke was just joking with us. The young eunuch, who was angry out of humiliation, concluded, there's no need to talk. Your Yarrow family collaborated with the Northern Jin dynasty to rebel. Death is not enough. As he spoke, the eunuch put 2 fingers together and wiped the table. Chen Pinggan's blade-strengthening gourd flew out of his waist and smashed the pair of chopsticks that were as fast as lightning. The third punch sent Jiao Shuyi flying. Wei Xian, who was at the door, moved aside, allowing the young duke's corpse to fall outside the inn. The horseman happened to be not far from the door. Looking at the corpse on the ground, he was still in a daze. Obviously, he didn't dare to believe that this was real. Chen Pinggan turned to the woman and said, Do you know why old General Yarrow almost died in an assassination attempt? It's because you guys are too easy to talk to. It's obvious that someone thought that the old general was dead, so none of the Yarrow family dared to be angry or say anything. The woman didn't seem to hear Chen Pinggan's words. Her expression was blank as she muttered, Dead. If he was killed by you like this, Duke Shen will definitely go crazy. His Majesty the Emperor will also be furious. The Yarrow family is finished. The hunchbacked old man who worked as a cook in the inn was also at a loss. The young girl, Yarrow Lingji, was even more shocked. In the inn, there was only the sound of the little girl reading weakly on the second floor. At this moment, the down-and-out scholar patted the woman's shoulder. His back was clearly facing Chen Pinggan, but his voice clearly sounded in Chen Pinggan's heart, You only need to kill, I'll take care of burying. 337. Chen Pinggan was skeptical about the scholar's words. The old Daoist had once brought him to the lotus blossom-blessed land to see all kinds of people. Chen Pinggan was more or less familiar with the structure of the officialdom. With such a mess, Chen Pinggan had already planned to flee to the south. He might even be chased by the Qi cultivators of the Great Spring Empire. Even if the abject scholar was from one of the 4 major sects in the Tongya continent, such as the Tongya sect, the Yugui sect, the Fuyao sect, and the Taiping sect, it would still be difficult for him to deal with the current situation. As for whether the scholar was from a certain Confucian academy, Chen Pinggan was inclined to think otherwise. Because in his impression, the sages of the academy were not willing to and could not casually interfere with the family affairs of the secular dynasties unless it involved the orthodoxy of the country. Regardless, Chen Pinggan still appreciated the scholar's good intentions. However, Chen Pinggan did not recklessly look at the scholar in order to avoid revealing any clues. Because the person that Chen Pinggan was most wary of was the palace eunuch wearing a red python robe. His aura was so condensed that it was said that not even a drop of water could leak out. Only his dantian was like a lantern hanging in the residence of Qi. With each long breath, it would brighten and darken. The light lasted for a long time and the darken was short-lived. It was not able to stay bright for a long time. Even if he was not a real Jindan Earth immortal, he was probably only a step away from it. Although the difference of one step was like the difference between heaven and earth. Only those who had reached the Jindan realm were of my generation. However, only the mountain immortals who had reached the earth immortal realm were qualified to say such words. For all the Qi cultivators of the 5 states and pure martial artists below the wind-controlling realm, this kind of half-formed Jindan realm was still high and mighty. Outside the inn, or rather, the entrance, Wei Xian's vision. One by one, the Qi cultivators flew over and landed beside the young rider. The old immortal master in the carriage held a horsetail whisk and the young female cultivator. Behind the dozens of Qi refinement warriors, hundreds of elite cavalry quickly spread out in formation, surrounding the inn so tightly that not even a drop of water could trickle through. Every time the bows and crossbows specially made by the imperial court left the armory, they had to be reported to the Ministry of War. Regardless of whether they were damaged, or lost, they had to be checked and inspected carefully. The young rider squatted down. His friend of many years died with his eyes wide open, full of shock and confusion. The young man gently touched the face of the young duke and asked him to close his eyes. Obviously, he was the master. The corpse on the ground, Jiao Shuyi, who had drowned in the Jianghu, was actually this person's study partner. In fact, other than Jiao Shuyi, there were 2 other young men in the inn. They were the study partners of the princes who had no official position and no salary when they were young. They were the descendants of noble families, so that one day, they could change the title of prince to crown prince. It would be better if they could change the title of prince directly from prince to emperor. The young rider was the 3rd prince of the Great Quan dynasty, Liu Mao. Although the elder brothers of the 1st and 2nd prince had high prestige in the officials and generals, Liu Mao was the most favored prince of the current emperor. Moreover, it was rumored that this prince liked to sneak out of the palace to travel when he was young. Every time he returned to the palace, he would bring back a basket of stories of the Jianghu and interesting stories of the countryside, which always made the emperor laugh. Moreover, Liu Mao's birth mother was the emperor's most beloved concubine. She died early, so the emperor, Liu Zhen, cared for Liu Mao very much. Probably because he loved the house, he also treated the study partners of Jiao Shuyi and the other old officials who were sent to the 3rd prince's residence very well. Liu Mao stood up and ordered people to carry away Jiao Shuyi's corpse. He said to the inn, "I'm very curious. Since you want to save the Yarrow family, why did you insist on killing the son of Dukshan? Why didn't you wait until the inn's messenger pigeon sent the news to the Yarrow family and let old General Yarrow come out to solve this matter? Is there any room for discussion after killing Jiao Shuyi?" Wei Xian leaned against the door, feeling that this was a bit interesting. The great general of the southern expedition, Yarrow Zhen, had just been ambushed and suffered heavy injuries. Even if he received the news from the inn, he might not be able to come in person. Most likely, he would send a direct descendant of the Yarrow family or a trusted aide to mediate with Jiao Shuyi, who was biting like a mad dog. The reason why this hidden descendant of the Great Spring imperial family purposely stopped at the inn and drank the plum wine was obviously a scheme to take advantage of the situation. The sheep he wanted to take advantage of was naturally the leader of the Yarrow family's iron cavalry, Yarrow Zhen, who was far away at the border and controlled the army. Jiao Shuyi's arrogance and domineering attitude was not completely faked. He jumped out and made enemies with all of the Yarrow family's descendants except for Yarrow Zhen. If Yarrow Zhen came in person, Jiao Shuyi would not be suitable. After all, he was not Duke Shen, Jiao Shuyi, and there was a difference in seniority between him and Yarrow Zhen. However, other than Yarrow Zhen, everyone else was a soft persimmon that Jiao Shuyi could easily bully. Therefore, no matter how many people came from the Yarrow family, they would only add fuel to the fire and exhaust their own vitality. The situation would only worsen. Wei Xian dared to say that Emperor Liu Zhen, who had already missed several ceremonies this year, such as the Zhuangyuan banquet and the spring and autumn sacrificial ceremonies, had not made an appearance. This meant that Liu Zhen was either critically ill or very likely to have encountered some unforeseen event. He had completely lost control of the imperial court. Originally, the competition for the position of crown prince required the various princes to spread their feathers like peacocks. Now, it had become a competition for the dragon throne. Naturally, it would become cruel and bloody. If Lady Yarrow had not married her daughter into one of the major clans in the capital and had not tried to establish a relationship with the Minister of Appointments because of her son-in-law, Li Shilling, she would have followed the teachings of her ancestors. She would have had a chance to continue to sit on the border and wait for the battle to come to light in the treacherous capital. When the time came, Yarrow Zhen would either have sent his legitimate son to the capital to meet the new emperor to express his loyalty, or the new emperor would have directly patrolled the border to the south to buy Lady Yarrow's support. Outside the inn, the third Prince Liu Mao's words were not for Chen Pinggan to hear, but for Zhonyang and the old hunchback, who were inside the inn. Once they heard it, the situation at the inn became even more interesting. You, Chen Pinggan, risked your life to protect the Yarrow family. If Lady Yarrow did not understand the situation and turned around to complain that your actions were unnecessary, framing Lady Yarrow as disloyal, would Chen Pinggan, who acted in a righteous manner, still be hot-blooded? A chivalrous heart had always been able to withstand the ravages of mountains of swords and seas of fire. Jianghu affinity, a promise of 1,000 pieces of gold could be exchanged for life and death, but it could not withstand a cup of ungrateful wine. Liu Maro laughed coldly and said, "Are you trying to force Lady Yarrow to rebel? You only know how to take revenge for a moment. Are you really a hero of Jianghu?" Just as expected. The human heart could not withstand scrutiny and probing. Furthermore, people were often like this. Before things were completely rotten, even if they were in a hopeless situation, they would still hold on to a sliver of hope. Although the head of the family, Yarrow Zhen, had encountered a treacherous assassination attempt, he had only been injured in the end. As for the Yarrow family's in-law, old Minister Li of the Ministry of Appointments, when he had submitted a letter to resign, the emperor had replied with a rather humorous reply in his memorial, "You're only halfway there, it's too early to resign." Then, the emperor had ordered people to send a few tributes to the Li manor. The combat strength of the Yarrow Iron Cavalry was still one of the best in the south, and no one dared to underestimate them. The Yarrow cultivators that had secretly infiltrated North Jin with the imperial court had probably returned to Yarrow Zhen's side. The son-in-law of the Yarrow family, Li Shilling, was said to have a chance to enter the Confucian Academy in Tongye continent. The Yarrow family and the Li family were the pillars of the country in the Great Spring dynasty. They were noble families. Even if the two families were to be connected by marriage, the people would not think that it was ambitious. Instead, it was a match made in heaven. It was the icing on the cake of the Great Spring dynasty's prosperity. It was a well-deserved story. Since that was the case, how could Lady Yarrow have died? Zhonyang's expression changed slightly. Old Hunchback's expression was uncertain. The girl on the second floor, Yarrow Lingji, looked at the white robe. Her beautiful face could not help but reveal a bitter expression. There was gratitude from the bottom of her heart, but there was also uncontrollable resentment. It was not that she was like this because she was afraid of death. Instead, it was because ever since the Liu family of Da Quan had established the country in the Yarrow family's border army, within the Yarrow family's ancestral hall, there were layers upon layers of memorial tablets and memorial archways. Each and every one of them had the surname Yarrow. These ancestors who had died on the battlefield, other than giving their descendants the courage to face death, also gave their descendants a formless pressure. The purity of the Yarrow family could not be allowed to be tarnished in the slightest by their descendants. This was human nature. The descendants of the Yarrow family could die, but the reputation of the Yarrow family could not be tarnished. Otherwise, how could they face their ancestors? It was tragic and respectable. Chen Pinggan did not respond to the third Prince Liu Mao's two questions. Liu Mao spoke for the third time. Since it seems like you will not change your mind, then how about we ask the unrelated people in the inn to leave? These young people are the descendants of the nobles of the great Spring Liu family. They did not lie in the shadows of their ancestors and enjoy the benefits. Instead, they personally went into the enemy's territory to kill the enemy. They should not die here. Reason, emotion, and Jianghu ethics. The young retainers at the two tables in the inn were all filled with righteous indignation. They glared at Chen Pinggan. Especially the three people sitting at the same table with Gao Shuyi. Their eyes were burning with anger. They could not wait to chop off Chen Pinggan's head and bring it to Gao Shuyi's grave as an apology. Wei Xian turned to look at Chen Pinggan, waiting for his answer. Should he let them go or kill them? Chen Pinggan ordered Wei Xian, "Don't let anyone go. As long as they don't go near the gate, don't bother." Wei Xian smiled and nodded. The eunuch was the only one who could act on his own in front of the third prince, Liu Mao. He said coldly with a feminine voice unique to eunuchs, "Your Highness, this is a group of ungrateful people. I beg you to allow me, General Shu, and Mr. Shu to take down this group of North Jin Kingdom thieves. So what if they are swordsmen? They are just trash with one or two more flying swords." The woman was about to speak when the scholar comforted her. "Jianyang, things have already come to this. Anyway, it can't get worse. Why don't we wait and see? No matter what you say now, it's meaningless." The little cripple, who was hiding behind the curtain of the kitchen, nodded vigorously. This Zhong Gai's words make sense in this lifetime. The old hunchback turned and said angrily, "You are already a cripple. Do you still want to be a mute?" The crippled teenager kept quiet out of fear and immediately shut up. In the inn, the 5 people, including Chen Pinggan, were all pure martial artists who were good at close combat. On the other hand, other than the General Shu Qingju, the eunuch and Shu Tong were Qi refinement warriors. There were also 2 tables of young retainers who belonged to them. They would only be restrained. On the second floor, Yarrow Lingji suddenly shouted at Chen Pinggan, "Stop killing people. Otherwise, our Yarrow family will be destroyed by you." The door on the second floor opened. Pei Qian stared at the young girl and said angrily, "Stupid girl, shut your stinky mouth. If you dare to order my father around again, I will stab you to death with the supreme swordsmanship that my father taught me." Then, the little girl asked the first floor, "Father, I have finished reading the book once. What should I do?" Chen Pinggan's back was facing the second floor. "Read it again." Then, Chen Pinggan added, "If you dare to shout again, I will make you eat books instead of reading." Pei Qian nodded vigorously. "Okay, father. I will listen to you." The moment Pei Qian closed the door, everyone from both sides attacked almost at the same time. On the second floor, Sui Yuyu controlled the long sword Infatuation, which looked like a magic weapon, and used the crescent moon style to slash the neck of the immortal master Shu Tong. Shu Tong used the Dipper Steps, which was dazzling. Not only did he dodge Infatuation time and time again, but he also made a gesture with his 2 fingers. His sleeves were filled with spiritual aura, and on his robe, a scene of 5-colored cloud seal appeared. At the same time, several black-armored generals appeared around him. They had armor but no body, but they were very agile. Although Infatuation could easily pierce through those armors, it did not seem to damage the combat power of these talisman soldiers at all. Once, the long sword pierced through the face of an armored soldier. It actually raised its arms and clenched the blade tightly with its 10 fingers. Sizzling sounds were heard and a large number of sparks splashed out. Xu Qingju, who was protected by the military school's armor pill, and Lu Baixiang, who was holding a narrow saber, stepped forward at the same time. Their sabers collided and a silver thread seemed to flow out from the tip of their sabers. In an instant, the two of them swapped positions after striking each other with their sabers. Outside the inn, 7 or 8 immortal spiritual weapons in the hands of qi cultivators were smashing toward Wei Xian, who was blocking the door. It was especially bright in the night. Wei Xian suddenly grasped the armor pill of the deity and infused it with his spiritual aura. In an instant, he was covered in armor, which was exactly the same as Xu Qingju, the general of Daquan. His fists were like dragons and as fast as thunder. His body was condensed like a waterfall, and with the protection of a low-grade Ju armor, Wei Xian did not directly hit the weapons of the immortal masters. Instead, he just deflected them. Between the two sides, the fireflies that were drawn by the magic weapons slanted in front of Wei Xian, making clanging sounds. In the blink of an eye, Wei Xian was wrapped in the light. However, the more he fought, the braver he became, and his momentum soared. In the inn, the woman of Lotus Blossom Blessed Land was on the right side of Sword Fairy Sway. She looked indifferent. She put 2 fingers together in front of her chest and controlled the infatuation to attack Xu Tong. Her other hand was as white as mutton fat. She gently twisted her wrist. Half of the chopsticks on the first floor turned into flying swords as if they had received a military order. They flew past the soldiers and assassinated Xu Tong. The remaining half flew to the second floor and hovered around her to deal with the unpredictable thunder art under Xu Tong's palms. Every time they collided, a chopstick would turn into powder. Martial madman Zhu Lian squatted quietly on the railing, not saying a word. In his eyes, there were only Chen Pinggan and the eunuch in the official's robe. These two people who could really decide the outcome had a tacit understanding. They went all out when they attacked. Using the mind talisman, Chen Pinggan's first punch was the deity drum-beating style. The guardian of the Great Quan dynasty, Huai Guang, used his yin spirit and yang spirit at the same time. The two dharma forms were illusory, but they had the majesty of a deity. Not only was Chen Pinggan's punch blocked, but the eunuch's yin spirit also reached into his chest. Fortunately, he was wearing a golden robe. Although there was a heart-wrenching pain in his chest, Chen Pinggan was still as immovable as a mountain. He stomped his foot. He stomped on the ground. His soul separated, and 3 Chen Pinggan appeared. The other 2 once again used the deity's drum-beating style. After the first punch, there were countless punches. 3:38. When they arrived at the door of the room on the second floor, Pei Qian had already run past Chen Pinggan and opened the door first. Chen Pinggan strode in. Pei Qian hesitated whether to follow him in. Chen Pinggan turned his head and ordered, "Go to the inn and ask for 3 more rooms. Let Zhonyang put the money on the bill first. At the same time, tell Wei Xian that I will be in seclusion for a few days. During this time, I won't see anyone. The 5 of you better not stray too far from the inn." Pei Qian looked at Chen Pinggan and asked, "Are you okay?" Chen Pinggan didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Did he look like he was okay? He casually said, "I won't die." Pei Qian carefully closed the door and said, "Call me if you need anything. I'm right next door." Chen Pinggan nodded. The 2 flying swords, number 1 and number 15, hovered in the room. Chen Pinggan first took out a stack of dust-cleansing talismans and pasted them all over the room. Then, he took out 2 porcelain bottles. The quality of the materials was worlds apart. One was a red porcelain bottle given by Lu Tai. It could grow bones. Chen Pinggan had personally experienced the miraculous effects of this bottle of elixir in the forest outside the Flying Eagle Fortress. The other bottle was a secret elixir unique to the Yang family pharmacy. It could stop the pain no matter how great it was. Chen Pinggan didn't have the chance to use it during his 2 travels and encountered so many monsters and demons. He didn't expect that he would take it out in a small border town. Chen Pinggan took off the severely damaged robe on his body. It involved a lot of his flesh and bones. Chen Pinggan was in so much pain that he broke out in cold sweat. He sat at the table and reached out his trembling hand to open the plain white porcelain bottle of the Yang family pharmacy. He poured out a pitch-black elixir and forced it into his mouth. He even took off the wine gourd and drank a mouthful of green plum wine. Then, he began to apply the thick ointment in the red porcelain bottle. His hands, arms, and shoulders were another round of torture. The strength of the eunuch in the python robe was beyond Chen Pinggan's expectation. In order to deal with this crisis, Chen Pinggan had been cautious enough. In addition to the martial madman Zhu Lian, he also invited the other two people in the picture scroll, Sui Yuyu and Liu Baixiang. However, he did not expect Li Li, the palace guard of the Great Spring Dynasty, to be so unreasonable. Apart from the realm of Qi cultivator, his body was actually comparable to a pure martial artist of the sixth realm. Previously, Chen Pinggan only had 3 pieces of grain rain money left. Following the thoughts of the old Taoist and the Taoist child carrying the golden blade strengthening gourd, Chen Pinggan took a small gamble. He threw 1 piece of grain rain money to the picture scroll on the right of Sui Yuyu, which was the least likely to be touched. As expected, with just 1 piece of grain rain money, the female sword fairy of the lotus flower blessed land slowly walked out of the picture scroll and came to this world. Obviously, the Taoist child had predicted that Chen Pinggan would be the last to invite the right of Sui Yuyu. If it were not for the little figure of Lotus Lake's guidance, according to Chen Pinggan's order of choice, he would invite the martial madman Zhu Lian who lost to Ding Ying first, followed by the founding emperor Wei Xian, the devil cult's Liu Baixiang, and the right of Sui Yuyu. Then, Zhu Lian, who cost a total of 15 pieces of grain rain money, was a great show of strength. Perhaps Chen Pinggan would really put the other 3 picture scrolls on the shelf. Chen Pinggan sat at the table and closed his eyes. His hands hung naturally, but he visualized himself sitting in the posture of a sword furnace. His breathing gradually calmed down, like an old monk in meditation or a Taoist in forgetfulness. At noon 2 days later, Chen Pinggan changed into a clean set of clothes and finally walked out of the door. He stood by the railing and found that the lobby on the first floor was a little strange. The strange thing was that the inn was too peaceful. The old hunchback sat on the bench on the other side of the curtain and puffed out smoke. The little cripple was wiping the tables and stools. The landlady was taking care of a table of guests who were drinking heartily. The down-and-out scholar in green sat by the door with a sad look in his eyes. If Chen Pinggan had not sensed the 4 long and subtle breaths of Zhu Lian in the rooms on both sides, he would have mistakenly thought that nothing had happened and that he had not met the son of Dukshan or the eunuch dressed in a python robe. Chen Pinggan only felt that it was a lifetime ago. In this battle of life and death, Chen Pinggan's gains were even smaller than his battle with Ding Ying, but he was more emotional. It probably had something to do with his state of mind and winning or losing. The first person to walk out of the room was the old man Zhu Lian. His body was still stooped, but he showed a smiling face. He saluted Chen Pinggan with his fists clasped and shook them twice. He said, "Young master, it is a blessing in disguise. Congratulations." Chen Pinggan nodded and asked, at that time, "What about the cavalry and the Yarrow family outside the room?" Zhu Lian moved closer to Chen Pinggan's side and laughed softly. That gentleman from the Da Fu Academy managed to subdue the 3 parties as soon as he made his move. The prince outside the door immediately left with his men. He only took the body of the junior duke, Gao Shuyi. As for the Imperial Horse Directorate head eunuch's body, he didn't even dare to mention it. As for the older prince, he and the border troops of the Yarrow family who rushed to the inn did not even dare to come. They turned around and left. When the lady boss of the inn and the others woke up, this gentleman came up with an excuse, saying that young master had killed many people and won them over with his fists. With the intervention of the other prince, the matter was resolved. The gentleman then continued to stay here to eat and drink. If the world were filled with such scholars, it would be too interesting. Zhu Lian then talked about the details of the disturbance. Chen Pinggan walked towards the stairs and asked doubtfully, "Zhonyang and the others are still in the dark. How is that possible?" Zhu Lian laughed. The gentleman from the academy must have informed the 3 parties not to reveal his identity. He deliberately hid it from the people in the inn. Chen Pinggan asked, "What about Pei Qian?" Zhu Lian pointed in the direction of Hu'er town. "He borrowed some copper coins from someone and is having a good time in Hu'er town." Chen Pinggan frowned. When he reached the first floor, he went straight to the scholar at the door. Zhu Lian did not follow him. He looked like an old housekeeper of a small family and sat at the table closest to the door. Chen Pinggan sat on the doorstep, took off his wine gourd and handed it over. The scholar in green shook his head and stared blankly at the woman who was laughing with the guests. "I'm not drinking. If it's not given to me by Zhonyang herself, it's tasteless." Chen Pinggan retracted his hand and drank a mouthful of wine. Who was the prisoner that Jiao Shuyi and the others were escorting back then from the northern Jin state in the south? The scholar named Zhong Kuei didn't hide anything and said casually, "It seems to be the remnants of the water god temple in Pine Needle Lake, as well as the followers of the orthodox mountain god, His Excellency Jin Huang, and his wife." In any case, the third prince of the Great Spring Empire caught all of them in one fell swoop. If you hadn't interfered, I'm afraid there would have been many Yarrow family members in the prisoner carriage. But don't worry, I promised you that I would clean up the mess. You don't have to worry about the Great Spring Empire seeing you as an enemy. But whether it's the third prince or the Dukeshan's mansion, I can't stop them if they hate you. If you can't even deal with this." Chen Pinggan laughed. "It's okay to deal with this. I believe that the Great Spring Empire will not have a second pagoda scholar." The Great Spring Liu Empire was indeed much stronger than the Combe country and Sai country in the central part of the Aquarius continent. As for why Excellency Jin Huang, who had a good impression of Chen Pinggan, suddenly became a prisoner of another country from a mountain god. It was clear that the green water buffalo great demon beast had died in Chen Pinggan's hands, and his property had been confiscated after that. Chen Pinggan wasn't interested, and he wouldn't get to the bottom of it. When Chen Pinggan mentioned the Imperial Horse Supervisor Li Li, the scholar's face turned gloomy, as if it was a big worry. Chen Pinggan saw that the scholar was silent and turned to look outside the inn. He was still worried, so he stood up and walked to the side of the official road. He looked in the direction of Hu'er town, worried that Pei Qian would cause trouble there. When Chen Pinggan returned to the inn, he ordered a table of food from the housekeeper and asked Zhu Lian to call Lu Baixiang and the other two downstairs. After the meal, Pei Qian swaggered back to the inn, looking very happy. When she saw Chen Pinggan, she felt a little guilty and her eyes wandered. Chen Pinggan did not ask her in detail. He only asked her if she had eaten. The little girl with a round belly shook her head and said no. Then she ate the leftovers on the table. Chen Pinggan walked out of the inn alone and took a walk to relieve his boredom. In the end, when Chen Pinggan returned to the inn, he found that the entrance was blocked by people who were cursing at the inn. It was very lively. 339. Sorry to keep you waiting. There were at least 20 men and women cursing at the entrance of the inn. The young, strong men had angry looks on their faces, the women had their hands on their hips, and the children were heartless. They were either licking the candid whores with their heads tilted to one side, or secretly shooting at the drunkard with their slingshots. Chen Pinggan stayed in the crowd for a while, but he still couldn't figure out the reason because they were speaking in Hu'er town's dialect. However, when he saw Pei Qian on the second floor panicking when she saw him, Chen Pinggan had an idea. Pei Qian was originally squatting by the railing on the second floor, either picking her nose or picking her ears. She didn't take it seriously, and even deliberately made a disgusting gesture. The fiercer the cursing outside, the happier Pei Qian was. Fortunately, the men and women of Hu'er town didn't dare to enter the inn. The little cripple found the noise too annoying, so he gloomily cleaned up the leftovers on the table. The old hunchback sat in the distance, smoking a pipe. Zhonyang sat behind the counter, eating melon seeds, and didn't mind making a big deal out of it. The abject scholar, who was half an accountant, originally wanted to be a peacemaker, but he was pushed hard by a man and staggered back to the inn. He resentfully returned to the woman's side and pretended to pick up the snow-white account book. Zhonyang rolled her eyes at him. When Chen Pinggan crossed the threshold with a straight face, Pei Qian wanted to sneak back into the house, but she was stopped by Chen Pinggan, who asked her to go downstairs. Pei Qian timidly went down the stairs. Without waiting for Chen Pinggan to ask, she confessed everything. According to her story, she went to Hua town to look for a pharmacy to buy some herbs for Chen Pinggan. Then, her peers there bullied her and ganged up to bully a foreigner like her. At first, they snatched the stick of candied haws that she intended to leave for Chen Pinggan. She tolerated it, saying that she had read a lot of books and understood that harmony was the most important thing. Those people also liked to follow behind her and say nasty things. They formed a group and even threw stones at her, but she ignored them. Later, when she bought a dragonfly kite, someone was jealous and pulled it over and let it go. With a whoosh, the kite floated out of Hua town and completely disappeared. She was so angry that she fought with them. 5 or 6 people couldn't beat her, and she even cried and went home to call her parents and elders to beat her. She wasn't stupid, so she quickly ran away. Besides, the dragonfly kite cost 20 copper coins, and it was gone just like that. She was so heartbroken that she had to search for it outside Hua town for half a day. Although Pei Qian didn't have much confidence, she had been paying attention to Chen Pinggan's expression when she lied, ready to be beaten at any time. When the time came, she just needed to protect her head. It didn't matter if her stomach or arms were kicked or pinched a few times by Chen Pinggan. After eating a full meal, she would be a good man again. However, Chen Pinggan only listened to Pei Qian's explanation quietly before saying, "After lying, tell me the truth again. It's okay if you don't want to. You can stay at the inn in the future. You won't starve to death." Pei Qian didn't speak. Chen Pinggan went to the counter. Zhonyang glanced at the skinny little girl at the top of the stairs and chuckled softly. "Young Master Chen, how did you raise such a little devil?" She almost turned an alley of Hua town upside down. First, she cheated the children of their food and scared the little guys who were playing with mud. They all believed that she was a princess from Great Spring's capital city who lived among the common people and would sooner or later return to live in the palace. After getting familiar with her, she played with those children all day long and became the king of the children over there. Later, they had a falling out over a kite and fought fiercely. It seems that she was beaten twice by an adult who rushed over. If it were an ordinary person, he would have stopped after suffering a loss. But your girl claimed to be my distant relative and relied on this to hire a few ruffians in Hua town to beat that man up in the dark. After that, she became even more lawless. Most of the children were neighbors in the alley, and when ghosts appeared at night, not to mention the children, even the adults were so scared that they did not dare to turn off the lights at night. "Young Master Chen, you know that Hua town is really haunted now. Because of this, several constables guarded the place for a whole night before they found the little girl who was pretending to be a ghost. Guess what the result was? Your girl was stunned and politely sent her back after saying something to them. You have to say, a group of constables in the guise of officials escorting a little girl into an inn really does look like a princess." Chen Pinggan nodded and said, "Young Master Chen, you know that Hua town is really haunted now. Because of this, several constables kept watch for a whole night before they found the little girl who pretended to be a ghost." Chen Pinggan felt a headache coming on. He turned his head to look at Pei Qian, but he did not see him. He only saw a pair of legs. He must have been sitting at the top of the stairs. Zhonyang covered her mouth and laughed. Spending money to avert disaster is not a big deal. It's just a small amount of money, at most 10 taels of silver. You must not get involved in this matter. Just leave it to me. Young master, with your good temper, those people will be even more motivated. It's just a small matter, but they can make it sound like a disaster that pierces through the sky. Chen Pinggan helplessly said, "Put it on the tab. I'll settle it with the room later." Zhonyang stopped laughing and said seriously, "Young Master Chen is the benefactor of our Yarrow family. If I still have to fuss over such a trivial matter, won't I, Zhonyang, be ashamed?" Chen Pinggan shook his head and said, "It's not the same thing." Zhonyang still wanted to say something, but Chen Pinggan had already said, "I'll have to trouble madam with today's matter." Zhonyang agreed and walked out of the counter leisurely. She elbowed the bookkeeper and took out some money from the drawer. She then went to the entrance of the inn to settle the matter. Hua town, located at the border, was a place where good and bad people were mixed together. Not everyone was capable, but they were certainly insightful. With so many people coming and going, there was nothing new that they had not heard before. There were still some people who had some ambition. Moreover, there might be some experts who concealed their identities, such as Zhonyang and third master of the Yarrow family. Previously, there was such a big commotion at the inn, especially the fight between Wei Xian and the Qi cultivators, which was very eye-catching. It was truly a scene of immortals fighting. Looking from afar at Hue town, other than the commotion, of course, there was awe. Later on, there was a valiant cavalry detouring to the north, and all kinds of rumors began to spread. Some said that the inn's Zhonyang was a vixen who liked to seduce men. She was really a vixen. Most of the people who believed this were the aunties of Hue town. There were also some who said that Hue town had not been peaceful all these years because of demons and devils. This time, there was a real dragon crossing the border. Zhonyang swayed her waist and stood at the entrance. The atmosphere outside was suddenly reduced. The scholar Zhong Kuei laughed and asked, "Since when did Tongye continent have such a big sect in the pugilistic world?" "A sect in the pugilistic world that is equivalent to a clan of immortals?" Speaking of this, the scholar laughed to himself, as if he felt that his theory was very novel and interesting. The strong man who guarded the pass alone, the bloodthirsty and violent hunchbacked old man, the man who used a saber to feed the martial general Shu Qingju, and the beautiful woman who suppressed the immortal master Shu Tong with her sword-riding skills. The most important thing was that these four people, whether it was their aura or cultivation, were all improving in the battle. Of course, there was also a young man who was not a Qi refinement warrior but could ride a sword. He was just a little handsome and had stolen his limelight from Zhonyang. Otherwise, he would definitely hold arms with this person and call him brother. Chen Pinggan hesitated for a moment, but still chose to be honest. "We are not from Tongye continent." Zhong Kuei nodded and said, "Are you from Hassa continent?" The Hassa continent was very famous. Even though the Tongye continent was a place that liked to look down on the heroes of the world, they were still convinced by the Hassa continent that was closest to the inverted mountain. That was because the Chen family of Yingyin lived there, and Chen Chunan, who was almost the only one who had the title of Mellow Scholar. Zhong Kuei had admired Hassa continent for a long time. It was only because of his status in the academy and the teachings of his teacher that he could not travel there for a long time. Other than the Chen family of Yingyin, Hassa continent had many famous places. Zhong Kuei wanted to visit all of them. Tongye continent was too boring. Both the people at the foot of the mountain and the cultivators on the mountain did not like to walk around. Chen Pinggan pointed to the north. Zhong Kuei's eyes lit up. "Do you know Mr. Qi from Cliff Academy?" Chen Pinggan choked and did not know how to answer. Zhong Kuei laughed and said, "Most likely you know Mr. Qi and Mr. Qi doesn't know you. It's okay. We are the same." As for the nearest neighbor to the north, Baoping continent, Zhong Kuei did not think much of it. There were probably only a pair of brothers, Qi Jingchun from Cliff Academy and Kui Dong from Dallas Imperial Tutor. However, it was said that Lizhu Cave fell and Mr. Qi died. Even Zhong Kuei's teacher felt sorry for him. He told Zhong Kuei in private that if Qi Jingchun was in Tongye continent, he would not have been humiliated like this. At the very least, he would not have been alone and hated by the whole world. Chen Pinggan smiled and asked, "Shall we chat over a drink?" Chen Pinggan was willing to drink with Zhong Kuei just because of the words Mr. Qi. Zhong Kuei looked at the woman at the door and said in a low voice, "We can drink, but if Zhonyang complains, you have to help me." Chen Pinggan nodded and said, "Of course." Zhong Kuei carried 2 jugs of green plum wine. As the accountant, he ordered the little cripple to bring them a few dishes to go with the wine. Zhong Kuei sat cross-legged on the bench and did not look serious. Chen Pinggan asked, "I heard that you are from Da Fu Academy." Zhong Kuei did not take it seriously and said casually, "Yes, I am. I am a gentleman." Impressive, right? Chen Pinggan toasted a bowl of wine. Respect for gentlemen. Zhong Kuei quickly reached out to stop him, but Chen Pinggan had already finished it. This gentleman from the Jianghu Academy sighed and said, "Is this worth a toast? I think you just want to drink, right?" Chen Pinggan remembered the sage from the academy that he met in Shu Shui country, Juju. He was very different from this gentleman in front of him. Juju was at old Senior Song's Swordwater Villa. He could decide a person's life and death just by reciting poems. Scholars, after reading different books, would probably have different graces. Zhong Kuei suddenly thought of something. The man who blocked the Qi refinement warriors outside that night was wearing the Dew armor. If I am not wrong, it should be the West Peak recorded in the ancient books of the military school. It is one of the 8 ancestral armors of the Dew armor. Is it passed down from your ancestors? Chen Pinggan's heart trembled slightly. He shook his head and said, I bought it from Lingji shop in inverted Hanging Mountain. Zhong Kuei asked, how much did you spend on it? Chen Pinggan shook his head and said, I only spent some money on it. It is not expensive. I plan to give it away in the future. Zhong Kuei smiled and said, Lingji shop did not know the value of the goods and let you pick up a big bargain. But it is normal. The West Peak set up a restriction for the expert. If not for the fact that the academy had the secret manual that was about to be broken into pieces and was familiar with the inside story of the military school of the armor pill, I would not have recognized it. I advise you to keep it. It is such a valuable item. Moreover, it has so many stories. It is a pity to give it away. Chen Pinggan did not say whether he would give it away or not. He asked curiously, the 8 ancestral armors? Zhong Kuei picked up a peanut and threw it into his mouth. The full name of the Dew armor is Deity Dew armor. Let me ask you, what deity? What Dew? Chen Pinggan shook his head and did not know. Zhong Kuei smiled and said, in addition to the West Peak, the other 7 earliest Dew armors are Buddhaland, Flowerbud, Mountain Ghost, Narcissus, Sunglow, Colorful Clothes, and Sea of Clouds. Most of them were destroyed in the war and completely disappeared. There are not many left. Only the Mountain Ghost and Colorful Clothes are left. Although the West Peak in your hand is very shabby, it is considered good compared to the other 2 that were left in the world. If you meet someone who knows the value of the goods, you just have to ask for the highest price. I guarantee that you will make a lot of money. However, these ancestral armors have lost their foundation. Their supernatural power to protect the owner is less than 1 in 10. It is really regrettable. For this, I have to drink a glass of wine. Zhong Kuei lifted the bowl and drank it up first. Chen Pinggan had to drink a bowl. Zhong Kuei took the initiative to talk about the storm. Those 2 princes are not good people. If you still stay in the Great Spring, take it easy. There are rules at the foot of the mountain, and there are many masters at the foot of the mountain. For example, when the 3rd prince met you, he was drenched in dog's blood because there is always someone better than him. Chen Pinggan nodded and said, that's true. Zhong Kuei suddenly smiled and said, thinking about the fight between you and the pagoda scholar of the Great Spring that night, and seeing you agree with me at the table today, I am not used to it. What's wrong? You have suffered at the hands of the academy in your hometown, so you are afraid of such a gentleman title? Chen Pinggan could not help laughing. Zhong Kuei said again, that day you said that everyone's reason is reason. I think you said it very well. As for asking the young marquis to ask himself, although it sounds more domineering and reasonable, in fact, it is a little impolite. Chen Pinggan drank a mouthful of wine and said, it can't be helped. Zhong Kuei nodded and said, indeed, the world is like this. When you are in a cesspool, you think it is natural to eat shit. When someone serves you a dish, you are not willing to eat it. Chen Pinggan was speechless. Was this the reason that a Confucian gentleman would say? Zhong Kuei sighed and said, but even if the world is rotten into a cesspool, it is not a reason for us to eat shit. At this moment, Chen Pinggan was holding a dish with one hand and a bowl of wine with the other. He felt a little awkward. Zhong Kuei noticed Chen Pinggan's strange behavior and hurriedly comforted him, we are not eating shit and urine. It is good wine and good food. Don't worry and eat. Chen Pinggan ate and drank in silence. He could not keep up with this guy's thoughts when chatting with him. For a moment, Chen Pinggan missed little treasure bottle. At the door, Zhonyang came out and quickly solved the problem. In the eyes of Hua Town's residents, the inn was mysterious and evil. Therefore, They did not even have the courage to enter and complain. Chen Pinggan thanked the woman and went to the stairs. Pei Qian was still sitting there and drawing. When Chen Pinggan told her to follow him, she obediently followed behind him. She looked embarrassed and downcast, as if she had made a mistake and was repentant. However, Chen Pinggan did not need to think to know that the little girl behind him was secretly delighted. He could even imagine Pei Qian's arrogance the next time she went to Hua town. When they reached the room, Chen Pinggan sat down. Pei Qian did not dare to sit down. She closed the door and stood across the table. Chen Pinggan went straight to the point and said, "You will stay here from now on. I will give thee in a sum of money." Pei Qian suddenly looked up angrily. She was about to speak when she saw Chen Pinggan's cold expression. She lowered her head again and said, "I know I was wrong. I won't do it again. I'll go to Hua town later and give Xiaomai a butt curtain. I'll buy her a big butterfly that costs 40 copper coins. It's colorful and much prettier than a dragonfly. Xiaomai and the others have been eyeing it for a long time, but they can't afford it for a bunch of poor kids who eat tanghulu as if it's the new year." Chen Pinggan asked, "Where did you get the money?" Pei Qian looked up and blinked. "I borrowed it from Zhonyang. It's not much. Together, it's only 2 taels of silver." Chen Pinggan asked, "How are you going to pay it back?" Pei Qian said timidly, "I will put it on the tab first. I will be your slave in the future and pay you back bit by bit." Chen Pinggan said, "You will stay here from now on. You can do odd jobs for the inn and pay Zhonyang back slowly." Pei Qian frowned and looked like she was about to cry. Chen Pinggan pointed at the door and said calmly, "Get out." Pei Qian wiped her eyes hard and said loudly, "I know. You have always liked that little bookworm called Cao Qinglang. You've always been worried about him. If you could, you wouldn't want me. You would only keep Cao Qinglang by your side. He made a mistake, but you wouldn't be like this. You would only reason with him. You would even tell him not to be like me in the future. Chen Pinggan, you always want to cast me aside." Pei Qian turned and ran out. She slammed the door and went back to her room. Chen Pinggan began to think about the route to the north of Tongya continent. After all, the immortal ferry to Baopian continent's old dragon city was in the north of Daquan. If they took a detour, they would have to travel another 2,000 to 3,000 miles. Now that they were on bad terms with the third prince of the Liu family of Daquan, it was almost an irreconcilable relationship. If he were the third prince, he wouldn't be able to endure it either. Even if the third prince was scared by him and the gentleman from Dafu Academy, a prince who could lead an army to the hinterland of the enemy country and kill the His Excellency of another country and the water deity temple, even if the third prince wasn't determined to kill him, he would most likely cause a lot of trouble for him. If it didn't work, they could only take a detour. On the same floor, not to mention Pei Qian who was in seclusion, Wei Xian was flipping through a miscellaneous book bought from Hua town. The founding emperor didn't treat him badly. There was wine and meat on the table, and there was the military armor pill on the table. After the battle, Wei Xian pondered for a long time. He couldn't help but marvel at the immortal methods of the qi cultivators in the world and the heavenly materials and earthly treasures in this world. Further away was the room of martial madman Zhu Lian. He was walking in circles around the table with his hands behind his back and his waist bent. Lu Baixiang stood by the window of his room and looked into the distance. The narrow saber, snow-stopping, was hanging on his waist. It was said to be a relic of an earth immortal of the nascent soul level. It was indeed not comparable to the so-called divine weapons in his hometown. Sui Yu sat cross-legged on the bed and breathed in and out. The infatuated sword was on the table. Chen Pinggan took out a blank picture scroll. Thinking of the killing intent that flashed by that night, he couldn't help but smile bitterly. One shouldn't have the intention to harm others, but one should always guard against others. In the dusk, Chen Pinggan went downstairs for dinner. Of the 4 people in the painting upstairs, only Zhu Lian was on time. He sat with Chen Pinggan and even helped to pour wine. Lu Baixiang and the other 2 didn't go out. As for Pei Qian, he stayed in the room and didn't make any movements. Chen Pinggan went out alone and walked slowly along the official road to Hua town. Walking on the bumpy yellow mud road, Chen Pinggan turned his head and looked to the west. Then he turned around and walked back to the inn. He arrived at the entrance of the inn at about the same time as a group of people. Unexpectedly, there was the injured head of the Yarrow family, Great General Yarrow Jun. He brought along the youth who was in danger with him. In addition, there was also the martial arts genius Yarrow Lingji who personally experienced the incident at the inn, as well as a young woman with a curtain on her head. Behind these people were 5 or 6 riders. They were no longer the Yarrow family's side riders, but rather the accompanying cultivators who didn't need to deliberately wear armor. In Dali, these mountain people who joined the army should be called Secretary Wu. After seeing Chen Pinggan dressed in a long green robe, the dispirited old general who still insisted on personally going to the inn immediately dismounted from his horse and walked quickly to Chen Pinggan. He cupped his hands and said, "Righteous man, you've saved us twice. Our Yarrow family is moved to tears. Tonight, we've come to visit our benefactor. Please accept my, Yarrow Jun's, bow." After the old general finished speaking, he was about to bow deeply to Chen Pinggan. Chen Pinggan could only stop the old general's arm and dispense with this grand bow. He had only stopped Yarrow Jun. The rest of the Yarrow family disciples and the cultivators who were on the same side as the Yarrow family had already bowed in unison. The old general's face was pale. He had a forthright personality that had been honed on the battlefield. He asked straightforwardly, "How should my Yarrow family repay you?" Seeing Chen Pinggan remain silent, the old general smiled and said, "It's not that I'm looking down on young master's chivalrous heart. It's just that if the Yarrow family were to turn a blind eye to such a great kindness, the Yarrow family would be too ashamed to hang the Yarrow character on the border army's banner." Chen Pinggan was also not polite. He asked, "Does old general have a way for me to avoid the eyes and ears of the imperial court and go to Tianqiu Peak on the northern border?" Yarrow Jun asked, "Benefactor, how many people are there?" Chen Pinggan originally wanted to say 6 people, but when the words reached his mouth, he immediately changed his mind and said, 5 people. Yarrow Jun thought for a moment, then nodded and said, "That's fine. If Benefactor trusts the Yarrow family, just wait here for a few days. After that, we will definitely let Benefactor's group of 5 safely reach Tianqiu Peak in the northern border." Chen Pinggan asked, "Will it cause trouble for you?" Yarrow Jun laughed heartily and said, "We've already survived all the trouble as big as the sky. Right now, there's nothing that can be called trouble." When the old general said these words, his entire body was relaxed. Although his injuries were not light, and the bumpy ride made things worse, his words were as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders. However, the people behind Yarrow Jun all had heavy moods, and their expressions were filled with unwillingness. Yarrow Jun did not seem to want to enter the inn, so he suggested that he and Chen Pinggan take the official road. Chen Pinggan did not object. The two of them distanced themselves from the crowd by a dozen steps. Yarrow Jun revealed the secret and said softly, "I don't dare to lie to Benefactor. I've fought and killed my entire life. This time, His Majesty has shown mercy and allowed me to retire in the capital and take up the post of Minister of War. I can bring my family and retainers with more than 100 people, so Benefactor can stay with them. I need to spend a few days to arrange a suitable position for you in the army. Truth be told, the Imperial Court will definitely investigate these 100 people carefully. They will investigate them one by one, so Benefactor and you will have to suffer some grievances." The old general felt somewhat guilty. After thinking about it, Chen Pinggan nodded in agreement. Being able to escort the Yarrow clan elder to the capital allowed Chen Pinggan to feel a little more at ease. The old general's first words did not conform to the rules of officialdom. Entering the capital to take up the post of Minister of War was a transfer, and it was not even a demotion. The Minister of War of the Great Quan dynasty was an important position in the imperial court, a seat that many great generals could only dream of. But for Yarrow Jun, if there came a day when he had to dismount, he would be retiring. Moreover, he would need to leave the southern border where the Yarrow clan had been rooted for generations and go to Mirage City, which could be considered leaving his home. Given Yarrow Jun's age and his status as the stabilizing force of the Great Quan dynasty, Emperor Liu Zhen's actions caused the entire court to ponder. But one thing was certain, the imperial court was prepared to protect the Yarrow clan, Or perhaps His Majesty had already made up his mind to throw the Yarrow clan out of the maelstrom, granting Yarrow Jun a pretty good ending where he could protect himself and live out his remaining years in comfort. Although the great Quan Liu clan's War of the Princes was abnormally intense in this generation, the current three princes, even the first prince who had been presiding over the northern border at such a young age, placed great importance on their reputation in court. To put it bluntly, it was not strange for Yarrow Jun to die of old age on the border, on the battlefield, or inexplicably on the battlefield, but it was impossible for him to die at the feet of the Son of Heaven in Mirage City. This was because it was rumored that a highly qualified gentleman of the Fu Academy had left the academy and taught in Mirage City for many years. Yarrow Jun did not want Chen Ping'an to think that they were going to Mirage City together so that Chen Ping'an's group could protect the Yarrow clan as they went north. Thus, he helped Chen Ping'an organize the Great Quan Imperial Court, explaining in detail the Yarrow clan's current situation and how they had managed to escape danger. This was partly due to the efforts of that gentleman of the Fu Academy in the capital and partly due to the invisible deterrence of that young gentleman at the inn. Chen Ping'an said almost nothing, mostly listening to the old general's explanation. The only question he asked was regarding the third prince's matter of escorting prisoners. Yarrow Jun had always been a rigid and inflexible person, paying even more attention to the relationship between ruler and minister, father and son, but after this calamity, his heart had been completely broken, and his style of doing things had changed. Many of the secrets of the Great Quan Imperial Court that he would not have told anyone even if he was beaten to death were now casually spoken of. Presumably, other than being sad, the old man was also somewhat relieved and able to retire in peace. The conflict between Excellency Jin Huang of the Northern Jin Kingdom and the water god of Pine Needle Lake had resulted in both sides suffering losses, destroying the foundation of the Northern Jin Kingdom. The number one mountain god of the Northern Jin Kingdom, second only to the 5 mountain gods, had been imprisoned in the Tensum prison carriages. The third prince had plotted for 7 or 8 years, mobilizing many secret factions of the Great Quan Imperial Court. As long as he could successfully escort Excellency Mountain God back, in the eyes of Mirage City, he would have made an unparalleled contribution, no different from a general opening up a vast frontier. Alas, all his efforts had been for naught in that inn on the border. Imperial Horse Supervisor Li Li had died, and so had Duke Shen's only son. After 10 years of hard work, he had only gained face and suffered losses. Yarrow Jun casually chatted with Chen Ping'an as they walked down the official road. He regarded Chen Ping'an as his benefactor and did not feel awkward because of Chen Ping'an's age. While Chen Ping'an and the old general were chatting outside, the atmosphere in the inn was strange. Jianyang was leaning against the door, the old hunchback was drinking wine for the first time, and the scholar Zhong Kuei was sitting on the doorstep, looking up at the woman's side profile. There was only one table of guests in the entire inn. The beautiful woman with a sword on her back, the dignified man with a saber, and the lean man who claimed to be a huge drinker, did not drink. They casually ordered 3 dishes from the inn. The little cripple was also starving. When he saw that there was still an empty table, he sat down with the 3 of them and ate. He did not take any food, only eating the white rice in his bowl. The little cripple stole a few glances at the woman opposite him from time to time. She was much prettier than the lady boss. How could there be such a beautiful woman in the world? She carried a sword on her back. She must be a heroine. He did not know if she would pass by the inn in the future. By then, he should be able to be a chef and would no longer need to sweep the floor, wipe the table, and serve tea and wine. At the thought of this, the young man felt that the rice in his bowl was no worse than the delicacies of the scholar Zhong. When Chen Ping'an returned to the inn, it was already closed. Only Zhong Kuei was left on the first floor, waiting to close the door. After closing the door, Zhong Kuei took the initiative to invite Chen Ping'an to drink, but they did not chat much. They drank separately. After drinking, Zhong Kuei made a bed on the floor near the counter, and Chen Ping'an went to the second floor to rest. In the end, Zhong Kuei laughed and said that the money for the wine would be recorded on the bill. Chen Ping'an felt somewhat helpless at that time. He did not understand why a Confucian gentleman with a high cultivation base would live under someone else's roof and live such a cowardly life. Chen Ping'an had seen and heard many so-called experts along the way, but none of them were so unparticular. The hidden Madame Gui, the sword-wielding guard at the inverted mountain, and the old Jindan sword cultivator who served as his and Fan Er's coachman were all not very approachable. In the end, Zhong Kuei said, "In the Jianghu, money is hard to earn and shit tastes bad. As long as you don't spend money to buy shit to eat, it's a good life." On the main road, the Yarrow family and the inn were getting further and further away. There was a woman riding alongside Yarrow Zhen. It was the woman wearing a veil hat. She lifted the veil hat, revealing a face that was naturally bewitching. She should be the Yarrow clan's femme fatale that Zhong Kuei had mentioned. Although her appearance was charming, her temperament was cold. Her pair of peach blossom eyes were innately flirtatious throughout the year. Because the old man was injured, he didn't ride his horse. This old general who had been on the battlefield his entire life was becoming more and more convinced of his old age. The young woman softly asked, "Grandfather, why don't you go in and see Ninth Aunt? So many years have passed and we still have to go to the capital this time. Don't tell me we can't even see her once." Yarrow Zhen shook his head. "Forget it." The young woman turned to look at the saber-wielding girl and the silent youth. "Lingji and Xianji aren't feeling too good right now." Yarrow Zhen smiled. "They don't have to think that they are number one in the world every day. This is a good thing. Once they arrive at Mirage City, they will have to suffer." The young woman hesitated to speak. The old man was silent for a moment. "This is good." She couldn't help but ask, "Grandfather, do you not blame little aunt and little uncle at all?" The old man didn't answer. In the darkness of the night, the old man suddenly smiled. "I heard you say that they are profound, intelligent, eloquent, and upright heroes. What are their aptitudes?" Although the young woman was puzzled and didn't know why her grandfather would mention this matter, she still replied, "They are first, third, and second." The old man smiled and asked, "Then what do you think their benefactor is?" The young woman shook her head. "I don't dare to say that they are benefactors." The old man nodded and turned his head. "Jinji, you shouldn't have gone to Mirage City. Don't you want to reconsider? It's not too late to regret now." The young woman named Yarrow Jinji smiled and said, "Since the fortune teller said," before she could finish, Yarrow Zhen glared at her and said, "You can't say it. When we arrive at the capital, you can't say it." Yarrow Jinji giggled and put down the veil again to cover his face. For the next 2 days, the inn and Hua town were peaceful. The little girl, Pei Qian, rarely went out. Even if she went out to look for food, she would deliberately avoid Chen Pinggan. During this time, Chen Pinggan accompanied Zhong Kuei to sit on the threshold and drink. The scholar said that he had to keep an eye on Hua town, but this wasn't the most important thing. He wanted to see Zhonyang every day. Chen Pinggan asked him why he liked Zhonyang so much. Zhong Kuei thought for a long time and could only say that he was obsessed with her. Chen Pinggan jokingly asked him how much he liked her. Zhong Kuei sighed and said that he didn't like her much, so he always felt sorry for Zhonyang. Chen Pinggan was at his wits' end. He was a weirdo. Before the Yarrow family's team arrived at the inn, Sui Yuyu knocked on Chen Pinggan's door and said that he had a few words to say. The two of them sat opposite each other. Sui Yuyu said slowly, "After the longevity bridge is rebuilt, if you want to ascend to the upper 5 realms, you will need to refine 5 magic treasures that correspond to the 5 elements. The better the quality of the items you refine, the higher your cultivation achievements will be." Chen Pinggan asked, "For example?" Sui Yuyu seemed to have expected this, or rather, the person who asked her to pass the message had calculated everything. She answered Chen Pinggan almost exactly as he said, "For example, the metal of the 5 elements could be the bag of refined gold coins or the golden gall. For example, the wood of the 5 elements could be the locust tree from Pearl Cave, or the divine bamboo from Green Mountain. For the water of the 5 elements, it could be the water character seal. For the earth of the 5 elements, it could be the dragon beheading platform, or the earth of the 5 mountains of the Dali dynasty. For the fire of the 5 elements, it could be some snake gallstones, or even a fire dragon on the wrist." Finally, Sui Yuyu said, "These are just examples. As for what to refine, how to refine, and when to refine, you still have to decide for yourself." After Chen Pinggan sent Sui Yuyu out of the room, he began to practice the sword furnace stance. That night, he slept soundly with the 1,000 years sleeping stance. Chen Pinggan had a strange dream. In the dream, someone was blocking in front of him. Both of his arms were broken and dripping with blood. This person bent his back, with his back facing Chen Pinggan. He bit the hilt of his sword with his mouth and performed an unimaginable horizontal sword stance. Chen Pinggan woke up and opened his eyes. He tried hard to remember the dream, but he could only remember a vague back view. And when Chen Pinggan was lying on the bed in a daze, far outside the inn, one big and one small were piling up a small mound. Zhong Kuei and Pei Qian, the former squatted there and looked at it, the latter added soil after filling it with soil, building a mound that looked like a small grave. He also specially found a wide and thin stone and inserted it in front of the grave. After completing the task, the little girl whose face was covered with mud turned her head to Zhong Kuei and said solemnly, "This is Chen Pinggan's grave. From now on this day every year, both of us will come to pay our respect." Zhong Kuei was puzzled. What is this? Pei Qian sat on the ground and crossed his arms. He gritted his teeth and said, "In my heart, Chen Pinggan is already dead." Zhong Kuei made a no sound. In that case, this small grave can be called a cenotaph. Pei Qian frowned. "What do you mean?" Zhong Kuei rested his chin on his arm and stared blankly at the small grave and small tombstone. Actually, he was looking at Pei Qian's bright eyes from the corner of his eyes. The scholar seemed to be deep in thought and seemed to have understood something. First, set a small goal, such as 1 second to remember. Book guest residence. 3:40. Chen Pinggan lay on his bed. That strange dream was still lingering in his mind. The last time was when he was reading in his dream on the ferry on Osmanthus Island. He didn't know what deeper meaning it had this time. Or was it just a dream? Was he being too paranoid? Chen Pinggan sat up. Since he couldn't sleep, he went to the table and began to count his belongings. During the day, Zhonyang sent a message that the Yarrow clan's entourage would pass by Hua town tomorrow morning. At that time, the two parties would travel together to the Mirage City and part ways at a famous ferry outside the capital. Chen Pinggan and his party would continue to head north to visit the immortal Heaven Fault Peak. The old General Yarrow Zhan had already arranged 2 identities for them. The latter half of their journey would be smooth and unimpeded. Chen Pinggan lit the oil lamp and placed the blade-strengthening gourd on the table. The 15th flying sword flew out. Chen Pinggan took out the golden wine robe. He was a little distressed. He was distressed about the damage to the golden wine robe. He was even more distressed about the copper coin used to repair the golden wine robe. He had already used up the Guyu money. It wasn't some small summer money or snow money. It was one of the small bag of golden wine coins that Zheng Dafeng gave to Chen Pinggan as a reward for his breakthrough in Old Dragon City. Chen Pinggan touched the neatly folded robe and sighed. No wonder people said that cultivation was a job that required mountains of gold and silver. No one should say that they had too much money to spend. However, Chen Pinggan couldn't help but think of Liu Yuju from the Upside Down Mountains Ape Raven Prefecture. Liu Yozhou's father was probably the same age as the god of wealth of the Snow Mountain continent. That was why he had the right to worry about having too much money. Chen Pinggan took out the bag of golden wine coins again and gently poured them on the table. They piled up one by one and formed a small building that was less than the height of a palm. Chen Pinggan smiled knowingly. It was just that the building was a little small and short. Otherwise, he would be happier. None of these invaluable gold and fine copper coins had the same color. Instead, they were all betting coins. On the front and back of the coins were engraved the words "Eliminate Evil" and "World Peace." The characters were different from the betting coins that Chen Pinggan had first encountered in the Lizhu cave. It seemed that every 60 years, there would be changes in the coins that were made. When Chen Pinggan was at the Upside Down Mountain, he learned a seemingly shallow but actually extremely orthodox refining chant from the golden wine coins. Previously, when he refined the golden wine coins, it only took him the time to drink a cup of tea. The golden wine robe was torn in many places, and the warp and weft threads were like willow branches sprouting. It was very magical. Chen Pinggan estimated that the robe would be restored to its original state in at most 10 days. Another unexpected surprise was that Chen Pinggan discovered that the golden dragons on the robe were acting strangely. The pearl held by the largest dragon and the eyes of the two smaller golden dragons were not shining with a golden light. After eating the gold essence copper coins, it was like adding a finishing touch to a dragon's painting. In particular, the spiritual energy contained in the golden pearl was as thick as water. This discovery made Chen Pinggan, who had never been obsessed with magic weapons in the world, somewhat moved. Because the appearance of this golden wine robe was the same as Wei Yixian and Zhu Lian's martial arts realm. It was rising. One had to know what was above magical treasures. Immortal weapons. The wealthy Fu family of the old dragon city, which had thousands of years of accumulation, did not have a true immortal weapon. However, Chen Pinggan did not expect the golden wine robe to grow into a magic robe with the appearance of an immortal weapon. After all, only God knew how many golden wine coins were needed to supplement it. Moreover, now that the pearl cave no longer existed, the 3 types of golden wine coins were very likely to be cut off and never appear in the world again. Even if he was lucky enough to cultivate the longevity bridge, he still had to refine the 5 magic weapons of the 5 elements. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. However, for Chen Pinggan, this was actually not too bad. It was just practicing a million punches after practicing a million punches. As long as he could see the road under his feet clearly and know where he should go next, it would be fine. As for how far it was and how difficult it was, he did not need to think about it. Chen Pinggan continued to take out some of the items that he had kept for a long time. The golden script gallbladder that Lord Xingwang, Shen Wen, gave to him. It was a fragment of the golden body that was left behind after the god's death. There was a pile of green bamboo slips that could be traced back to the green immortal mountain. Most of them had been carved with poems by Chen Pinggan. There was also the snake gall stone that Huang Guan, He Xiaoyong, returned to him. Finally, Chen Pinggan took out the water seal carved by Mr. Qi himself and gently placed it in the center of the table. Chen Pinggan lay on the table. As the saying goes, mountains and rivers are inseparable. The mountain seal had been destroyed in the flood dragon ditch, and the water seal seemed a little lonely. Chen Pinggan was in a daze. A thought came to his mind. On the way back, he would find a chance to buy a white jade hairpin. The material was normal. After carving the words, he could put it in his hair bun. It was not to show off, it was purely because he felt that with his current outfit, even if he did not wear the golden robe, he would still wear a long green robe and a jade hairpin. He was not a scholar, but he could still pretend to be one. Then when he returned to the Baoping continent, he would go to the Cliff Academy of the Great Sui to find Li Baoping and the others. He would finally not have to worry about implicating them and causing them to be looked down upon by their classmates. After reading so many books and seeing so many sages, Chen Pinggan still liked those words the most. The words of a gentleman were as gentle as jade. However, when he thought of the gentleman sleeping on the floor of the inn, Chen Pinggan was a little curious about the Dafu Academy. If it was not for the fact that it was inappropriate to delay his journey in the Tongye continent, Chen Pinggan really wanted to visit the academy. One by one, Chen Pinggan kept everything back into the square-inch object. Zheng Dafeng wanted to settle the old and new debts. Other than a bag of gold and copper coins, there was also a legendary item close to him. It was a piece of jade without any seal characters. It was extremely simple and elegant. However, Chen Pinggan was used to dealing with the 15 flying swords. It was convenient for him, so he did not touch the items close to him. Even Earth immortals of the nascent soul realm might not have a treasure. Chen Pinggan just hid it away. The Dew Armor West Peak was temporarily given to Wei Yixian. The narrow saber Still Snow was hung on Lu Baixiang's waist. The Sword of Infatuation was carried on Sui Yu's back. The golden demon binding rope made from the old flood dragon's long beard could be used as a belt if it was not for its color being too eye-catching. Regardless of whether it was the usual snow-white color of the golden necklace or the 2 green robes bought from the marketplace, it did not match. After putting away his rich belongings, Chen Pinggan was in a good mood. The only way to ease his worries was through money and wine. He stood up and walked to the window to open it. Suddenly, he found that Pei Qian next door did not move at all. The walls of the inn were not soundproof. The little girl often snored when she slept. Chen Pinggan thought that Pei Qian was like before, acting like a mouse in the middle of the night and stealing food from the kitchen on the first floor. However, after waiting for about half an hour, he heard the sound of the inn's door opening and closing. Chen Pinggan casually flicked his finger and instantly extinguished the light. Soon, he heard the sound of Pei Qian going upstairs. When the door next door closed, Chen Pinggan calmed down. He lit the oil lamp again and took out 3 books to read. They were borrowed from Jiyu Kan, given to him by Li Shisheng, and given to him by Zheng Dafeng. By now, he had already memorized the chapters in the book by heart. However, other than the mountain-quaking fist sleeping stance, 1,000 years, which he had recently started studying, there was almost no progress in talismans and sword techniques compared to before he accidentally entered the lotus flower-blessed land. He really could not afford to be distracted. Chen Pinggan believed that he could try writing some of the talismans that were slightly higher in quality than the demon-suppressing pagoda talisman. There was a chance that he could finish them in one go. Chen Pinggan read until dawn. Before the sun rose, he heard a light rustling sound coming from next door. Not long after, there was a knock on the door. Chen Pinggan put away the 3 books and got up to open the door. In the end, he saw Pei Qian, who seemed to be ready to go. She had a cotton bag on her back and a walking stick in her hand. She looked up with a bright smile and asked, "When are we leaving for Mirage City?" Chen Pinggan asked, "Didn't I tell you to stay in the inn?" Pei Qian's smile did not change as he continued to play dumb. "Do you want me to wake up the little cripple to cook for us? We can only set off when we are full. I heard that Hua town is 2,000 to 3,000 kilometers away from Great Spring City. It is very far." Just as Chen Pinggan was about to speak, a down-and-out scholar yawning appeared at the top of the stairs and walked over to the 2 of them. Zhong Kuei slapped the back of Pei Qian's head and asked Chen Pinggan with sleepy eyes, "The Yarrow family came so early? Yarrow Zhen wants to be the Minister of War so much." Pei Qian, who was slapped for no reason, was furious. She raised her walking stick and was about to cut Zhong Kuei in half. But after seeing Chen Pinggan, she immediately stopped and complained in a low voice, "A gentleman uses his mouth and not his fists. How can you be a scholar? You deserve Zhonyang to look down on you. Little cripple is right. Poor scholars like you are the most hateful in the world." Zhong Kuei ignored the little girl's nagging and pressed Pei Qian's head with his palm. He smiled and said, "Chen Pinggan, you'd better take her with you. I don't want to face such a girl every day. It's too tiring. I reckon that the plum wine will be tasteless. Besides, Hua town is not peaceful. If you keep her here, it will go against your original intention." Pei Qian immediately stood up and straightened her chest. She looked down and tried to make herself look well-behaved. Chen Pinggan did not immediately give an answer. "Let me think about it." Zhong Kuei nodded and smiled. "You have to think about it." Chen Pinggan went downstairs for a walk. Just as Zhong Kuei opened the door to the inn, Zhonyang and the others were already up and busy with breakfast. Zhu Lian and the other 3 opened the door to the 2nd floor almost at the same time. It became lively all of a sudden. When Pei Qian and Zhong Kuei went downstairs, she secretly tugged on Zhong Kuei's sleeve. When he turned around, Pei Qian whispered, "I will put in a good word for you in front of Zhonyang. Is this returning the favor?" Zhong Kuei gave her a thumbs up. "You are so righteous." Chen Pinggan went out for a walk for a few miles. He walked slowly on the official road with the 6-step walking stance. He felt refreshed. He looked at the silhouette of Hua town in the distance. Chen Pinggan almost could not hold back. He wanted to take out the Yang light-lighting talisman, the only one made of golden material. He wanted to see what kind of deity was hiding in Hua town. If it was really a demon with a high cultivation level, the ordinary light-lighting talisman might not be able to reveal it. If it could make the gentlemen of Dafu Academy stay here to guard, it could not be some great demon of the 5 realms from Colorful Clothes Kingdom. However, Chen Pinggan forcibly extinguished the thought. If he really took out the golden light-lighting talisman, if there really was a demon lurking in Hua town, the talisman would burn. It would be a warning and also a provocation. Chen Pinggan would not find trouble for himself if he had nothing better to do. Besides, it was a rare golden talisman. Every time he used it, there would be one less. He would not be so wasteful. After Chen Pinggan returned to the inn, he sat by the door and felt a headache coming on. It turned out that Pei Qian and Zhong Kuei were sitting at the same table. Zhong Kuei had drunk a little wine and was misleading the other students. Pei Qian listened attentively with a look of enlightenment. Zhong Kuei asked, "Do you know why a gentleman uses his mouth and not his fists?" Pei Qian replied, "Scholars can't fight." Zhong Kuei lowered his voice and said mysteriously, "The true meaning of this saying is that a gentleman only needs to use his mouth and the other party is already dead." Pei Qian was puzzled. Gentlemen are so good at arguing. Can they scold each other to death? Zhong Kuei put one leg on the bench. His face was full of pride. He raised his eyebrows and signaled the little girl to pour wine for him before telling the truth. Pei Qian rolled her eyes, full of disdain. She looked at Zhong Kuei from the corner of her eyes. Her tanned little face clearly said, "Who do you think you are?" Zhong Kuei was not angry. He stretched out a finger and poked the charcoal-like little girl. He laughed and said, "Only you don't like to be taken advantage of." Pei Qian was angry. She stood up and bent over to slap Zhong Kuei's finger away. Zhong Kuei moved his body and was about to point at Pei Qian, but Pei Qian kept waving her hand. Jianyang looked at Zhong Kuei from the counter in the distance. She didn't think that a man's childlike innocence was worthy of a woman's respect. But since Zhong Kuei could do this, he shouldn't be a bad person. Pei Qian had never met such a shameless scholar. She was so tired that she panted and sat back down. She sneered, "Since a gentleman is so powerful, why do they say it's better to offend a gentleman than a villain?" Zhong Kuei smiled and said, "That's because you didn't meet me." Pei Qian's mouth twitched. "You're just making things up. How could you have read more books than my father?" Zhong Kuei slapped his own face. He was speechless. It was as if he didn't have the face to face the sages and teachers on the altar. "Consider it my loss." Chen Pinggan walked over to Jianyang and took out the silver he had prepared. Jianyang didn't refuse this time. The silver was only 20 to 30 taels. Since this benefactor of the Yarrow family was willing to give it, she could only accept it. She smiled bitterly and said, "Young Master Chen, I hope you can help me take care of Lingji in the capital. She is arrogant and not likable. Young Master, please accommodate her. Take it as me asking for a yard after getting an inch." Chen Pinggan nodded and agreed. He then smiled and stretched out his hand. Jianyang was confused. Chen Pinggan smiled and said, "The reward for taking care of Miss Yarrow is at least 20 to 30 taels." Jianyang hadn't laughed so happily for many years. She slapped the silver into Chen Pinggan's palm. The woman was overjoyed. "Oh, I didn't expect young master to be such a shrewd businessman." Chen Pinggan kept the silver and joked, "You need to know how to make money when you are away from home." Zhong Kuei turned his head to look at Jianyang and Chen Pinggan, who were happily interacting with each other. He shouted towards the kitchen, "When breakfast is served later, remember to bring me a bowl of aged vinegar. I want a big bowl." After breakfast, the sound of horses galloping on the road outside the inn became clearer. Farewell was imminent. Chen Pinggan suddenly thought of something and asked Zhong Kuei tentatively, "Can you help me write a spring festival couplet?" Chen Pinggan thought that the scholar in green robes in front of him was a gentleman from the academy. He must be good at writing. It would be a good omen for him in the coming year. Zhong Kuei's eyes lit up. "Will you pay?" Jianyang laughed angrily. "Do you only care about money?" Zhong Kuei was resentful. He ran to the counter and rubbed his hands. "Jianyang, give me a brush and ink." Jianyang rolled her eyes. "You are an accountant. Can't you find it yourself?" The inn had a brush, ink, and red paper cut into blank spring festival couplets. This was because the old hunchback had always done it himself during the past New Year's. He was Yarrowjan's third brother after all. Although the Yarrow family was one of the wealthiest families at the border, They were not negligent when it came to poetry and writing. If the Yarrow family's disciples were really unrefined martial artists, they would not be able to do it. Chen Pinggan said that there was no need to prepare a brush and ink. He had it. Before he said this, he had already flipped his wrist and took out a small snow ore from his Fengsuan object. Pei Qian very flatteringly took the pair of red paper couplets and spread them on a wine table. She did not forget to remind Zhong Kuei, who was standing in front of the table with his sleeves rolled up. You have to put in more effort and write better. You have to hang it on the wall of my house in the future. Zhu Lian and the other three gathered around, curious about what this gentleman would write. As for where Chen Pinggan got the brush and how he could write without dipping it in ink, Zhonyang pretended not to see anything. After Zhong Kuei took the brush, he concentrated his qi into his dantian. His expression was solemn. With a light shout, his brush moved like a dragon and snake as he wrote down 5 words. The words were proper, but they did not seem to have the strength of character or charm. The content was the brush drops to shock the wind and rain. It was obvious that this was not a spring festival couplet. Instead, it was as if Zhong Kuei had finally found an opportunity to show off his scholarly identity. Zhu Lian had been bending over and carefully looking at the words with a smile on his face. Sui Yuyu had already turned his head to look at the inn's entrance. The Yarrow family would be arriving soon. Zhonyang expressionlessly said, "Little cripple, go get a broom. Someone is itching for a beating." Zhong Kuei innocently said, "Don't. I wrote it with all my heart. If it doesn't work, I'll write another one. The cost of these 2 spring festival couplets on the table will be on me." Chen Pinggan smiled and said, "It's pretty good. I'll take this one. Just write another 5 words. Zhonyang glared at Zhong Kuei. The latter quickly pushed the gloating little cripple away. "Go to your master's room and get another pair of couplets." "Forget it, I'll just write 2. If Zhonyang is not satisfied, I'll change it." Zhong Kuei wrote the first couplet. The poem after the first couplet was like weeping ghosts and gods. Perhaps he felt that he had written too big. Zhong Kuei laughed dryly and found a way out for himself. "I'm rusty. I didn't write it well. It's not even half of my usual skill." Zhong Kuei wrote the next 2 couplets in a proper and festive manner. They were proper spring festival couplets and were not as sloppy as the first couplet. The new year brings joy to the rest of the year. After writing the second couplet, Zhong Kuei was extremely satisfied. He said that the content of this couplet was the ancestor of all spring festival couplets in the world. Zhonyang was most satisfied with the third couplet because it was suitable for the occasion. It said that the country was prosperous, the family was prosperous, the country was prosperous, and the old and the young were safe. Even Pei Qian felt that it was pretty good. He finally gave Zhong Kuei some face. Chen Pinggan carefully put away the 3 couplets and thanked Zhong Kuei with cupped fists. Zhong Kuei accepted it calmly. Then the 2 of them looked at each other. Chen Pinggan reminded him helplessly, "Brush." Zhong Kuei asked, "I've already given you 3 couplets with such beautiful meanings. Can't you just give me a brush?" Chen Pinggan shook his head and said, "I can't." Zhong Kuei wanted to bargain, but he saw that Zhonyang's face was dark. He guessed that she would personally sweep him out of the house without the little cripple looking for a broom. He sighed and reluctantly handed the little snow cone back to Chen Pinggan. He muttered, "The brush on the pole has the word God. It's fated to be with me. What a perfect match. Chen Pinggan, you're breaking up an affectionate couple. You're killing the mood." Chen Pinggan didn't try to hide it. He put away the little snow cone that Li Shixing had given him and said with a smile, "I really can't give it to you." Seeing Zhong Kuei's pitiful expression, Zhonyang smiled and said, "I'll waive the cost of the couplets. Not only that, but for the sake of the 3 couplets, you can take a jug of 5-year-old plum wine." Zhong Kuei immediately beamed with joy. The official road outside the inn was already filled with dust. The saber-wielding girl, Yarrow Lingji, and the youth, Yarrow Shenji, dismounted their horses and went to the entrance of the inn to welcome Chen Pinggan and his party. Zhonyang told Yarrow Lingji to be careful on the road and then choked with sobs. The girl's eyes also reddened. She lowered her head and turned away, no longer looking at her mother's worried face. Yarrow Jeanne, dressed in casual clothes, stood beside a carriage. In the Yarrow clan's party entering the capital this time, other than the 3 intentionally empty carriages, there were also 5 tall steeds specially prepared for Chen Pinggan. They were all first-class warhorses from the Great Spring Border Army. Even the children of the capital's top-notch nobles might not be able to own one. Yarrow Jeanne didn't expect that other than the skinny little girl and the stunning woman with the long sword on her back, the rest of Chen Pinggan's group of 4 would all choose to ride warhorses north. Yarrow Jeanne had no objections to this. After greeting Chen Pinggan, the old general returned to his own carriage. There were a dozen or so books on the art of war, all of which were passed down through the Yarrow clan's ancestors. Each book had many notes and insights of the Yarrow clan's ancestors as they flipped through the pages. Almost every page was like this. Perhaps this was the orderly inheritance of a noble clan, the continuous flow of incense. This time, Yarrow Jeanne only brought 3 Yarrow clan children. The 3 of them belonged to the same generation. Yarrow Jinji sat alone in a carriage, while Yarrow Xianji and Yarrow Lingji rode side by side at the rear of the party. 7 or 8 accompanying cultivators were scattered among the group. Yarrow Jeanne and Chen Pinggan frankly admitted that 2 of them were secretly worshipped by the Great Spring dynasty. If they hadn't been ordered to enter the capital this time, even he, as the highest-ranking general of the Great Spring dynasty, had no right to mobilize those 2 cultivators. The other 60 or so riders were all old border soldiers who were familiar with archery and horses. There were also a few family members of these old soldiers. Most of them were stewards of the Yarrow clan's manors, servants, and so on. Chen Pinggan was mixed in with the group, riding slowly. Even though Zhu Lian was sitting on a horse, his body was still curled up, rocking up and down with the horse's back. He seemed to be the most casual and amiable of Chen Pinggan's 4 retainers. Lu Baixiang was resting with his eyes closed. Wei Xian was like a fish in water in the cavalry group. He was very natural. At the inn, Zhonyang was unwilling to withdraw her gaze for a long time. The old hunchback was squatting at the door, smoking a pipe. The spirals of smoke covered his wrinkled, weathered face, like the mountain mist between the ravines of the mountains. The little cripple climbed to the roof and looked into the distance. They had just parted, but he was already looking forward to the next reunion with that sword-bearing sister. Zhong Kuei came to the small grave. The stone tombstone had already fallen. Someone had even dug up the soil and taken away the items inside the cenotaph. It was a bit fun. Children, after all. Zhong Kuei rubbed his head and turned to look at the majestic group. He withdrew his gaze, put his hands behind his back, and staggered back to the inn. He muttered to himself, "The sun rises from the eastern sea, melting gold for 10,000 miles. When the moon sets in the west, the night apes rise. It's a pity that it's not a good book, or else it would be a masterpiece passed down from generation to generation." Zhong Kuei thought for a moment, hesitating whether or not he should make a trip to Hua Town. Master was a little too timid. He was, after all, the mountain lord of Daefu Academy, and was born in the residence of a saint in the central divine continent. Although that 9-tailed fox's name was at the very front of the second page written by Lord Bai, since he knew her real name, wouldn't it be a simple matter if he wanted her to die? Zhong Kuei hugged the back of his head with his hands. A cool breeze caressed his face. It was as if the autumn wind was still swirling in his raised sleeves. The women in the inn had never seen Zhong Kuei like this. First, he set a small goal. For example, 1 second. (3:41). After Zhong Kuei left the posthouse, the old Daoist kept him in an old pagoda tree that looked like a piece of Jingtang wood. The old Daoist suddenly turned around and arrived at Chen Pinggan's courtyard in just 1 step. Chen Pinggan, who was still in a daze, quickly bowed and cupped his hands. Junior Chen Pinggan greets the old immortal master. Zhong Kuei mentioned his death casually, but when he mentioned the Daoist of Taiping Mountain, he didn't hide his closeness. The old Daoist waved his hand, "No need to be so polite." Chen Pinggan straightened his back and asked, "Old immortal master, why did you come back?" The old Daoist looked at Chen Pinggan and nodded. You're a real hero if you can tie them down. No wonder Huang Ting and Zhong Kuei looked at you in a new light. Chen Pinggan didn't understand, but he didn't ask. The old Daoist was in a good mood and asked with a smile, You call yourself a swordsman, where's your sword? The old Daoist of Taiping Mountain turned a blind eye to the flying swords number 1 and number 15 that appeared from the blade-strengthening gourd. Chen Pinggan said honestly, I used to practice boxing and just started practicing swordsmanship. So when I practice swordsmanship now, I'm just holding the sword in the air and visualizing it in my heart. The old Daoist said to himself, if I knew this, I wouldn't have been so busy competing with others. Not only did I lose, but I also missed watching your situation in the lotus blossom-blessed land. The old Daoist was tall and wore a hibiscus crown that symbolized one of the 3 branches of Taoism. His Daoist robe was white, and his hair and beard were white. Chen Pinggan didn't know how to answer, so he didn't say anything. There was no need to act smart in front of such a wise old immortal. Any disguise was no different from an old woman wearing rouge or a child wearing an official's robe. It would only make a fool of himself. The old Daoist suddenly asked, I can lend you a sword. 60 years or 100 years, it's negotiable. You can exchange it with treasures or pay GUU. Chen Pinggan hesitated for a moment before shaking his head. Thank you for your kind intentions, but I already have a sword. Chen Pinggan blushed, besides, I don't have a single GUU on me. The old Daoist didn't force him. The reason why he wanted to lend a sword to this young man was because he admired his promise with Zhong Kuei. There was also a deeper layer of selfishness and goodwill in it. However, after the words left his mouth, he already felt some regret. It's better not to spoil things. The chaos in the Fusue sect worried the old Daoist. As for why he returned to the small courtyard, it was because he saw the unusual movements in Chenping's lake. It seemed that Zhong Kuei's death had greatly affected his state of mind. But when he looked at it carefully, he relaxed. It was a taboo for cultivators to be like a small boat, drifting with the current. As for those whose mental states were as chaotic as Willow Catkins, they were not even worthy to talk about taboos in the eyes of the old Daoist. They should not be cultivating Tao at all. They cultivated Tao and were lucky enough to climb to a higher realm. Everything they did was for personal gain. They fought for opportunities, treasures, and spiritual energy. When they left the mountain to walk the world, other than showing off and bullying others, what good could they do? But no matter how much the old Daoist couldn't stand Qi cultivators who cultivated their strength but not their minds, he could only guard Taiping Mountain so that his sect wouldn't go astray. Chen Pinggan asked shamelessly, Does the old Daoist have a protective mountain formation? The old Daoist nodded and said, My Taiping Mountain has 2 protective mountain formations. One of them has the bright moon mirror as its center. It can shine through all the evil spirits in the world, making them unable to hide. The distance depends on the cultivation of the person who is holding the mirror. Once the mirror shines on one, it can cause one's cultivation to drop temporarily. Then, it's the 4 swords formation's turn. The 4 ancient swords are imitations of the 4 ancient great celestial swords. They are half-immortal weapons. After forming the formation, they're equivalent to an immortal weapon. They can travel thousands of miles in an instant. That old bastard from before, if he hadn't refined one of them, he would have been killed by me. It'll be fine even if he runs thousands of miles away. Now, he's escaped death. But the realm of immortals is divided into left and right realms. The old bastard has just reached the 12th realm and his realm is not stable yet. Plus, he's suppressed by the rules of this world. Now, his natal item is destroyed, his real body is pierced with several holes, and his primordial spirit is injured. He's not worth mentioning anymore. When the old Daoist mentioned the old ape with the sword on his back, he was full of murderous intent. The majestic aura around him was so substantial that it was white and misty, like thin streams of water lingering around. The old Daoist calmed himself down and the vision disappeared. This was actually one of the side effects of the drop in realm. The trouble is that the old bastard suddenly burrowed into the ground and disappeared along this broken ancient dragon vein. It's most likely a premeditated escape route. The old Daoist pointed to the top of his head. Previously, I fought with the old bastard, and then I defeated a dark underworld big boss. A certain scholarly sage, who was in charge of guarding the sky screen above the Tonga continent, naturally saw it and landed on our Taiping Mountain. After learning of Zhong Kuei's death, he was furious and personally went to kill the white ape. Who would have thought that the old bastard would hide it? Now, it's up to Huang Ting, who has karma with it, to find some clues. As long as she finds it, even if Huang Ting dies in the battle, one of the 72 sages in the Confucian temple will be prepared and can kill her in one strike. Chen Pinggan wanted to say something but stopped. The old Daoist smiled and said, "This is the worst-case scenario. Huang Ting has always been lucky. She's sharpened her temper in the lotus flower-blessed land. With the protection of the two ancient swords, chasing after the white ape might be an opportunity for her to break through the realm." Chen Pinggan nodded. The old Daoist smiled playfully. "After I forcefully dragged her out of the lotus flower-blessed land, I thought I would have to whine and complain to her for a long time. Unexpectedly, she didn't complain at all. Along the way, she mentioned you many times and said that she would definitely go to Dallas Dragon Spring to find you in the future." The old Daoist waved his sleeves lightly. "That's strange. I'm not a talkative person. What I said tonight was worth decades of saliva." Back to the topic, the mountain guarding formation of Taiping Mountain has a long history. It can both attack and defend. Many of the great sects and orthodox mountain sects in the Central Plains can't compare to it. I can't teach you how to refine and operate the formation privately as it involves the fate of Taiping Mountain. However, I have my own mountain guarding formation from an ancient Immortals cave residence. It has great killing power and I can sell it to you. However, it requires too much silver and costs a lot of money to build. Maintaining the formation requires even more luck. I originally planned to give it to Huang Ting as her dowry one day if she wanted to establish her own sect in the Tonga continent or get married and become Taoist companions with someone. I'll give it to her as her dowry, but I'll have to fork out more than half of my coffin capital. Chen Pinggan swallowed his saliva. It had nothing to do with Huang Ting's dowry or coffin capital. He was shocked by the words "too much silver." The old Taoist priest noticed Chen Pinggan's hesitation and laughed. He joked, good plan. I like it." Before Chen Pinggan could figure out what was going on, the old Taoist priest no longer mentioned the mountain guarding formation. He reminded him softly, "Chen Pinggan, although I don't know what treasure you have on you that can hide from the heavens and prevent others from divining your location and fortune, you must cherish it. It's an item that can only be found by chance. There's only one in the entire Taiping Mountain and it was left behind by our founding ancestor." Chen Pinggan thought of the inconspicuous oil paper umbrella and nodded heavily. He looked at Chen Pinggan. The old Taoist priest was very pleased. The woman Huang Ting and the gentleman Zhong Kuei were the few young people that the old Taoist priest took notice of. Now, there was also this Chen Pinggan. The old Taoist priest felt that whether it was the Tonga continent in the southeast or the vast world, it was better to have more young people like him. The world was in chaos again. There was still a pillar. In order to prevent Zhong Kuei's soul from being taken to the Yellow Springs Road by the big boss of the Mansion of the Dead, the old Taoist priest dropped a level. He knew that he would never have the chance to make up for the biggest regret in his life. After the founder of Taiping Mountain successfully ascended to the immortal realm, he was given the title of Heavenly Lord Guan Miao by his lineage. The biggest regret of the old Taoist priest's life was that in history, whether it was the orthodox world of the Confucians or the Qingming world, as long as a Taoist ascended to the Lord of Heaven from a perfected cultivator, no matter which of the three lineages he belonged to, he could invite the founder to personally hand over a Taoist robe, a Taoist crown, and a token. However, as the newest Lord of Heaven in his lineage, Heavenly Lord Guan Miao didn't get to see the founder leave the Beko Keikyung building and descend to the vast world. The old Lord of Heaven didn't dare to make wild guesses, but everyone in Taiping Mountain had been pondering about it. For that reason, the head of the Taiping Mountain sect even went to the academy in the northernmost part of the Tonga continent and asked if the Confucian sage, who had a sacrificial statue in the Confucian temple, had made things difficult for their headmaster to show up. The Mount Master of the academy was also a straightforward person. He didn't want to beat around the bush with the Taiping Mountain clan master, so he asked with a smile, "The other two headmasters may have the same treatment, but the founder of your lineage has a close relationship with the Confucian school. If he wants to come to the vast world, who will stop him?" After getting this answer, the old Lord of Heaven became more depressed. After thinking about it, he could only think that his cultivation was high enough, but his great Tao was still small. Therefore, the founder of the hierarch wanted to knock him down. Before the Battle of Taiping Mountain, the old Lord of Heaven thought that if he ascended to the Ascendant Realm in the future, he would be able to see the founder. Now, it was completely an extravagant hope. There was no regret at all. It was inevitable. When the old Taoist priest was about to leave, Chen Pinggan said, "Thank you, old immortal." The old Taoist priest asked with a smile, "Why are you thanking me? Are you talking about Zhong Kuei's fall in cultivation?" The old Lord of Heaven shook his head, "No need. Taiping Mountain owes him this." Chen Pinggan said in a deep voice, "Thank you, old immortal and Taiping Mountain. They let me know that the immortals on the mountain also have a chivalrous heart to be kind to the world." The old Taoist priest was in a good mood. "Well, I didn't expect you to be similar to Zhong Kuei. You are very good at flattering." Chen Pinggan said helplessly, "It's my sincere words." The old Taoist priest looked at the young man with a smile, "If it's sincere flattery, it will make me feel comfortable." The old Taoist priest left with the wind. A small head was lying on the window, staring at the yard in a daze. It was strange that no one in the post house noticed the appearance of Zhong Kuei and the old Lord of Heaven. Only Pei Qian looked at Chen Pinggan in the yard in the middle of the night by accident. Chen Pinggan looked back at Pei Qian, "Go to sleep." As soon as Chen Pinggan said that, Pei Qian went to get a stool, climbed up the windowsill, jumped down, and landed steadily. Chen Pinggan asked, "Why aren't you sleeping? What are you doing here?" Pei Qian said fawningly, "I can't sleep, so I want to talk to you for a while." Chen Pinggan waved his hand and said that he wanted to practice boxing. She could stay if she wanted. After watching for half an hour, Pei Qian felt sleepy. She told Chen Pinggan that she was going to sleep, took a deep breath, and rushed to the windowsill. She jumped high, probably trying to press her hands on the windowsill and then kick her legs randomly. She thought that she would look cool if she jumped up. But her chin suddenly hit the windowsill. She fell backward. Chen Pinggan turned his head and couldn't bear to look at her. Pei Qian sat on the ground, covered her mouth, and turned her head. Her eyes were hazy with tears, and she was about to cry. Chen Pinggan walked over, squatted down, and gently took her hand away. He looked at it and asked with a smile, "Are you still acting like a hero?" Tears streamed down the little girl's tanned face. Chen Pinggan had no choice but to retract his smile and help her stand up. "There's a little girl who's about the same age as you. She's also so careless, but she can withstand pain better than you. If it were her, she would definitely smile at me right now. She might even comfort me not to worry." Chen Pinggan added, "But everyone has their own temperament, you don't have to learn from her." The two sat at the stone table. Pei Qian only dared to open her mouth slightly and asked vaguely, "What is her name?" Chen Pinggan said, "Her name is Li Baoping. She likes to wear red cotton-padded jackets, and she likes to call me young martial uncle." Pei Qian whispered again, "You like her a lot?" Chen Pinggan nodded. How could there be a young martial uncle who didn't like Li Baoping? She was right. Pei Qian was silent. Chen Pinggan asked, "Just now you watched me practice boxing. How was it?" Pei Qian was confused. This time she wasn't pretending. She didn't know why he asked this. Chen Pinggan was also confused. "Haven't you thought of secretly learning?" Pei Qian asked back, "Why would I learn to walk around like you?" She stood up in high spirits, baring her fangs and brandishing her claws. She pretended to unsheath her sword and poked randomly with her two fingers together. She jumped a few times and even performed a set of turtle fist. After showing off for a while, she said, "Of course I want to learn the most powerful moves." Chen Pinggan didn't find it funny. Instead, He looked dignified. On the street of Lotus Flower-blessed land, the boat flew on the sword. Chen Pingan's school dragon. And the god-beating drum style that defeated Zhong Qiu. There were some scattered moves of the devil Ding Ying mixed in as well. It was not similar in form. But someone said that if you didn't practice boxing, you would make ghosts laugh. But if you directly threw away all the boxing styles and practiced the gist of trueness. In Chen Pingan's impression, there was only one person who could do that. Sure enough. Chen Pingan asked a question. You stared at Master Shao during the day. What did you see? Pei Qian didn't dare to answer. Chen Pingan said, as long as you don't lie, it doesn't matter what you say. Pei Qian looked around and whispered, I think that the one surnamed Shao is up to no good. He's not a good person. Chen Pingan asked the second question, can you see the old Taoist tonight? Pei Qian nodded hard. Chen Pingan was a little helpless. That was the great supernatural power of Mount Taiping's ancestral master, Fangzhong Heaven and Earth. Chen Pingan asked again, if you have a promising future in martial arts and you think someone bullied you, what will you do? Tell me the truth. Pei Qian hesitated, only half dead with one punch. Seeing that Chen Pingan was about to get angry, she simply broke the pot. She crossed her arms and said angrily, I'll kill him with one punch. Chen Pingan asked with a smile, what if you're wrong? Pei Qian said confidently, I'm by your side every day. How can I be wrong? Chen Pingan didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He said with a straight face, but you'll go out and travel by yourself one day. Pei Qian said firmly, I won't. Why would I go out alone? There are so many bad guys out there. What if I can't beat them? Also, what if I don't bring enough money and starve every day? If I steal or rob, you'll beat me and scold me when you find out. What can I do? Right. So I'd better not go out. Chen Pingan asked, what if one day you're very good at martial arts? Better than me? Pei Qian frowned and thought carefully. She shook her head and said, I'm lazy. I like to sleep and I'm afraid of pain. You know that when I was walking, the soles of my feet were full of blisters. When I popped them, I cried until my throat was hoarse. Back at the inn, when you were fighting with someone, your bones could be seen from your arms, but you didn't cry. But I can't. If I look down at my arms, I might faint from fright. Sigh, if there's a peerless martial art that can be learned overnight without suffering, that would be great. Chen Pingan held back his laughter. You also know that you're lazy, unmotivated, and timid. Pei Qian drooped her head, dejected. Chen Pingan asked, why aren't you saying anything? Pei Qian felt wronged, my chin hurts. Chen Pingan smiled and turned around. He leaned against the stone table and looked at the night sky. Pei Qian imitated him, but she was small, so she could only lean against the stone table with the back of her head. Chen Pingan said softly, after the new year, you'll be 11 years old. So you have to read more books and learn more principles. There was still a long way to go. It was more tiring than practicing martial arts a million times. But it was good. It was rare for Chen Pingan to share his inner thoughts with Pei Qian. When I was in my hometown, I was slightly older than you and had never been to school. Mr. Qi told me that the truth is in the books, but the person is not. Chen Pingan murmured, I hope that everyone in the world can meet a Mr. Qi when they're young. Pei Qian was still a little girl who only liked to listen to what she liked. For example, Chen Pingan said that she would be 11 years old next year. In this world, only Chen Pingan would remember these things. She was 10 years old this year and 11 next year. The old Taoist priest of Taiping Mountain suddenly stopped and took out the locust tree. Zhong Kuei's ghost appeared and floated down. Above the sea of clouds, Zhong Kuei saw the most familiar person standing not far away. It was the master of Dafu Academy, his teacher. The master of Mount Hill just looked at Zhong Kuei. Zhong Kuei whispered, Teacher? The master of Mount Hill seemed to be unable to believe the bad news before. Even now, he still could not believe what he saw. It shouldn't be like this. It shouldn't be like this. He should not have gone to the Bio mansion and let this student, who was the best student in his life, go to Taiping Mountain. He should have stayed obediently in the inn in the border town and stared at the nine-tailed fox that was hiding in plain sight. Although the nine-tailed fox was a big demon in the 12th state, her identity was too special and her seniority was too high. Therefore, her real name had been leaked. As long as Zhong Kuei knew the real names of all the big demons in the world, he would be able to protect himself in the vast world. No one thought that the white ape with a sword on his back in Taiping Mountain was the culprit behind the escape of the demons in the well prison. Zhong Kuei could not stand the current atmosphere and said loudly, "Teacher, it's my duty." Scholars either use their knowledge to educate the common people and support the country, or use their righteousness to get rid of demons and defend the Tao. The master of Mount Hill was furious. "Do I need you to talk about these principles with me?" Zhong Kuei kept quiet out of fear. The old Lord of Heaven sighed, "If the academy blames us, Taiping Mountain will not shirk." The master of Mount Hill did not treat the old Taoist like how he treated Zhong Kuei. He said respectfully, "My brother will be angry, but he won't blame us. Besides, what did Taiping Mountain do wrong? When did you blame Zhong Kuei for not being able to protect Taiping Mountain? Why couldn't you protect that earth immortal?" Zhong Kuei added softly, "Teacher, that old Taoist is Liang Su." The master of Mount Hill was about to get angry again. Zhong Kuei immediately shut up. The old Taoist sighed, "After this disaster, Tongya continent may be a little better, but Hassa continent and Fuyao continent will be in chaos." The appearance of treasures in the 3 continents was indeed the plan of the demon race. Then, the old Taoist whispered, "Your academy must protect that young man from the Fusho sect. If he can find out about this." He did not continue. The master of Mount Hill nodded, "Of course. I've already discussed with the Fusho sect. That young man will enter the Dafu Academy under an alias. As for whether he will become a Confucian disciple in the future, it will depend on that young man's intentions." The old Taoist smiled, "If Ji Hai's disciple in seclusion becomes a gentleman, won't the Fusho sect fight you to the death?" The master of Mount Hill sighed when he mentioned the Fusho sect and the great cultivator Ji Hai. Ji Hai admitted that whether it was accepting the young man as his disciple or giving him the weapon, it was all right. However, when he saw the young man, Ji Hai could not calm down. It will hinder his cultivation and he will never be able to reach the immortal realm. How will he go to the Great Wall of Sword Chi and kill other 12 realms demons in the future? The old Taoist looked regretful. Tongya continent's only immortal Tao couple in the upper 5 realms is a rare match made in heaven. It's a pity. It will be difficult for Ji Hai to break through. The more stubborn he is, the harder it is to eliminate his inner demons. The master of Mount Hill smiled bitterly. Some things can be persuaded, but some things are not. The old Taoist sighed. The difficulty of cultivation was as difficult as ascending to heaven. However, a long time ago, it was said that ascending to heaven was not difficult, but cultivating the Tao was difficult. At the peak of the most majestic mountain in the Middle-earth divine continent, there was a god in golden armor, holding a sword with both hands. He was wearing a helmet, so the god's face could not be seen clearly. He stood beside a stone tablet at the peak of the mountain, and an old Confucian scholar sat cross-legged at the top of the stone tablet, looking extremely rude. The old man pinched his fingers in his sleeves and slapped his thigh. "Good, good." The god in golden armor twitched the corner of his mouth. The old man was proud and asked, "How is my disciple in seclusion?" The god in golden armor, who had been pestered by the old man for a whole month, said impatiently, "Good, good, good. Is that enough?" The poor old man pointed at the god who was almost as tall as the giant stone tablet and laughed, "I like this attitude of yours the most." Then, the old man began to talk about his past glory, thinking back to when I quarreled with others and they lost. They all looked like this. I feel good. The god in golden armor was one of the 5 great gods of the Middle-earth divine continent. He sneered, "Who was the one who suggested that a poor scholar like you enter the Confucian temple? Tell me, and I'll ask him if he's blind." This was a well-known unsolved case of the Confucian school. The old scholar smiled slyly, "Guess?" No matter how good the temper of the god in Suishan was, he would be irritated if someone nagged at him for a whole month. Moreover, this old man was someone who would not act unless he saw a rabbit. What good could it be? He did not hold back. Guess your grandpa. The old scholar raised his thumb and pointed at himself. He's not my grandpa, but our ancestor of the Confucian school. I wish that he was my grandpa. Sigh, what a pity. The great god of Suishan, who was known for his arrogance and unruliness, had a solemn expression on his face. He straightened his back and released his grip on the sword hilt. He cupped his fists and bowed to the heavens and earth. This could be considered an apology to the Holy Master. The old scholar continued, "You know what kind of person I am, right? I'm very thin-skinned and I always like to tell myself that I won't accept a reward if I don't deserve it. But I'm talented, I write well, and I'm good at reasoning. So our Saint Master came to me and earnestly advised me, and I was very moved. He told me a lot of things that I thought were ordinary, but there was one sentence that I felt touched the bottom of my heart. Since ancient times, sages have always been true heroes, but heroes don't necessarily have to be sages. When I heard it, I felt that our Holy Master understood me, so I made a small request to our ancestor." The god in Suishan said in a low voice, "I don't want to hear it." "Shut up." The old scholar wrung his hands and lamented, "Why can't you tell the good from the bad?" The god in Suishan sneered, "If I could tell the good from the bad, why would I let you go up the mountain?" The old scholar rubbed his chin and felt that he was not in the right in this matter. He immediately changed his words. "That old cow's nose in the Eastern Sea is really not likable, but he's still passable. He's quite generous and doesn't lose face. I know that he gave that child something good. Although it doesn't help with cultivation, it's better than coincidence. It's better than Alliance's broken bamboo hat. Just based on this, I won't argue with him about the dirty things he did in Lotus Blossom Blessed Land." The god in Suishan said sarcastically, "Even if you want to arm wrestle with him now, can you?" The old scholar said earnestly, "We scholars still have to compete with people in terms of reasoning. Fighting and killing, piercing through the sky, it's not true ability." For the first time, the god in Suishan didn't refute. The old scholar covered his sleeves with both hands. The astral wind on the peak of Suishan was surging. Even the golden armor of the god in Suishan had ripples of talisman. However, the old scholar's sleeves and hair didn't flutter at all. The old scholar said softly, "It's hard for a saint to die, but it's hard for a gentleman to live. Among the 100 schools of thought, only our Confucian school doesn't care about guardians. The academy is the greatest guardian of all scholars in the world. In the 3 great academies and 72 academies, there are all such gentlemen who died before becoming saints. I feel that these honest gentlemen who are not smart enough are the backbone of our world. We can." When the old scholar reached this point, he suddenly ran out of words. He turned his head and shouted, "Blockhead, think of an explanation." The god in Suishan said indifferently, "Indomitable spirit." The old scholar slapped his thigh again, "Great." The god in Suishan suddenly said, "You've never been a proper gentleman of the Confucian school." The old scholar was silent. In the Confucian temple, a saint walked out from his clay statue. The statue was very tall and the statue was very close to the saint in the middle. He was also holding the hand of a young man who had followed him from another world to the vast world. After leading the young man out of the gate, the saint turned his head and looked at the empty position of the statue. He smiled at the young man and said, "If you have the chance in the future, you can compete with someone." 2. 342. Pei Qian stared at the long golden bridge and recited the teachings of the sage. Zhu Lian was thinking. The long bridge across the buried river gradually disappeared. Pei Qian was a little thirsty and had no desire to study. She wanted to learn boxing and swordsmanship, but unfortunately, Chen Pinggan was not willing to teach her. As for Zhu Lian and the others, even if they were willing to teach, Pei Qian was not willing to learn. Chen Pinggan was still in the mysterious state of meditative forgetfulness. What was even more strange was that he found himself floating out. His spirit had left his body and was suspended in the air. Looking at himself sitting cross-legged, he felt very strange. Unlike the separation of the souls of Ding Ying and the eunuch in the python costume, this time it was somewhat like the legendary Yin spirit. It was the same as the gentleman Zhong Kuei that night at the inn. It was just that Zhong Kuei had cultivated both the yang spirit and the yin spirit at the same time. At this time, Chen Pinggan was drifting with the spiritual qi and astral wind in the buried river. He was far less stable than Zhong Kuei's yin spirit and yang spirit. If Chen Pinggan was just a toddler, then Zhong Kuei was a strong young man who could climb mountains and wade through rivers as if he were walking on flat ground. Pei Qian and Zhu Lian did not notice this strange phenomenon at all. Almost at the same time, the two Chen Pinggan had a thought that could not be dismissed. Chen Pinggan, who was drifting, turned his head to look at the lower reaches of the buried river. Then, sitting cross-legged, Chen Pinggan opened his eyes and said softly, "I need to practice the sword furnace stance here. Tonight's situation is a little different, so I can't go into detail. Pei Qian, Zhu Lian, you may need to help me keep watch for a few hours." Zhu Lian nodded and smiled. "It's my duty." Pei Qian stomped his foot and sighed. "You should have said so earlier. I should have brought some snacks for supper." The out-of-body Chen Pinggan took a step toward the buried river. In an instant, he was already dozens of feet away. He directly came to the surface of the buried river, like a piece of wood floating and sinking in the water. After Chen Pinggan stopped, he adapted to the strange environment of stepping on the void. With a tap of his toes, he would float forward very far. Chen Pinggan leaned forward and touched the surface of the buried river lightly like a dragonfly. He was like a mountain immortal flying in the wind, or a pure martial artist of the eighth realm of the far travel state. His sleeves fluttered as he rode the wind to travel far away. Chen Pinggan did not know that under various coincidences, this was the embryonic form of a qi refinement warrior's yin spirit. Shedding one's mortal body and exchanging one's bones, condensing one's divine energy and having a body outside one's body. This was the yang spirit, and it loved the light. With a single thought, he would be able to enter the underworld, free and unfettered. He was a yin master who loved to roam the night. At night, he visited the water god temple. Chen Pinggan felt that even if he just took a look, he would be back soon. As for the Chen Pinggan by the riverside, he closed his eyes and performed the sword furnace formula with both hands. Although one was sitting and the other was in a mental state, the two were one. The out-of-body yin master saw and felt everything. Chen Pinggan, who was practicing the sword furnace stance with his eyes closed, was very clear. He was completely immersed in it. The mystery of the great Tao was extremely mysterious. It was only at this moment that Chen Pinggan understood why cultivators would leave the mortal world and focus on cultivation. It seemed that the scenery in the eyes of these qi refinement warriors was already beyond the mortal world. At this moment, Chen Pinggan by the riverside seemed to be practicing the sword furnace formula. In fact, he continued to close his eyes and visualize the long bridge in his heart. Compared to the two times at the Lotus Flower Blessed Land, it was much more stable. Although he still felt that he could not walk on it and cross the river. However, he should be able to walk on the bridge and view the river. If not for Zhu Lian beside him, Chen Pinggan would have gone up and tried. The reason why he visualized tonight was not only because he thought about whether a gentleman should save or not, but also because he thought about the relationship between saving others and saving oneself. When he brought Pei Qian with him, Chen Pinggan only wanted her to read and memorize books. He did not talk about any of the principles that he had figured out himself. However, as long as he looked at Pei Qian's actions and words, it was as if he was looking at himself in the mirror. Chen Pinggan could not help but reflect on himself. Chen Pinggan did not feel much about the contents of the books and did not understand the true meaning. However, with Pei Qian around, Chen Pinggan would think more about it. For example, Chen Pinggan would reflect on himself 3 times a day, restrain himself and return to etiquette. Only by reading 10,000 books would one be able to attain enlightenment. Wonderful. Pei Qian had already memorized the first book. It seemed that after tonight's visit to the water deity temple, Pei Qian could probably start reading the second book. Reading was not about how much one read. It was about how many words one read. This was not a logical principle. He could talk to Pei Qian about it. However, she would probably just ignore it. It was said that there was once a monk who was illiterate. In the end, He only read one scripture and became a Buddha. On the bank of the buried river, there were two people who were like rainbows. Their figures were blurred and disappeared in a flash. They rushed downstream. When they saw the three people by the river, they nodded slightly as a greeting. When they disappeared into the night, Zhu Lian retracted his gaze. It turned out that after returning to the post house, the master and disciple changed into Taoist robes. They only told Yarrow Zhen that they had something to do tonight and could return to the post house before dawn. Yarrow Zhen would not stop them. In fact, he could not stop them. Even Yarrow Zhen, who was the head of the Yarrow family, did not know about the background of the two people who were stationed at the border. Yarrow Zhen even suspected that the master and disciple of the Taoist sect were directly under the emperor's command. They prevented the great cultivators of the North Jin kingdom from assassinating him and causing chaos in the border army. At the same time, they monitored the movements of the Yarrow family in the border army. After all, he had a relative who had just resigned from the Ministry of Personnel. For this reason, Yarrow Zhen privately asked Yarrow Jinji if he should deliberately make friends with the two people. He did not expect them to protect the Yarrow family who was going to expand in the Mirage City in the future. He wanted to take the opportunity to form a good relationship with them. She did not agree. She said that the two people's identities were special and they could not be roped in. Officials served the emperor. If the emperor was wise, then the officials had to be smart. They didn't even have the thought of trying to figure out the emperor's heart. It was useless to think too much. However, this only applied to border officials like the Yarrow family. The close officials by the emperor's side were a different matter. Yarrow Zhen was not convinced. His family was on the verge of death twice. If it were not for Chen Pinggan saving him twice, he would have been dead. He might even be accused of colluding with the enemy country and plotting to usurp the throne. If he still wanted to keep himself clean now, when he arrived in the Mirage City, there would be no border army around him. Wouldn't it be more dangerous and unpredictable? Yarrow Zhen thought of the disciple of the county guard who got off the horse and became a civil official. For a moment, he felt uncomfortable. Was it like what his granddaughter said? Would he have to deal with this kind of little bastard often in the future? Yarrow Jinji smiled and said the opposite. When his aunt married into the capital, the Yarrow family still wanted to clean up the snow in front of their door and abide by the rules of the ancestors. It was wrong. When they arrived in the Mirage City, under the premise that the imperial court accepted his grandfather, it was right to continue to be wise and protect themselves. If they competed with those rich and noble families, the Yarrow family would not be able to gain a foothold in the capital. However, it was not like they did nothing and were controlled by others. Yarrow Jinji said a famous Zen saying, "When the water reaches the end, sit and watch the clouds rise." Yarrow Zhen sighed. When Yarrow Jinji was still young, he had used his father's mouth to raise objections to his grandfather, Yarrow Zhen, when his aunt married that Li Shilling who had knelt outside the Yarrow family's ancestral hall on a snowy day. The general idea was that the Yarrow family had followed the rules of their ancestors for hundreds of years. Once they made an exception, the entire Yarrow family would know that the two had true feelings for each other. However, outsiders would not care about this. Mirage City would not care, and His Majesty the Emperor would not care either. The Yarrow family's children could not marry into a rich and noble family. Since they had made an exception once, would the Yarrow family's border army, which was loyal and devoted to the Liu family, make another exception? Without a first, there would be no second. But with a first, a second, a third, a fourth, and a fourth would follow. This was common sense. Grandfather, if I, Yarrow Jinji, were an outsider, I would suspect that the Yarrow family felt that living in a corner was too stifling. When the old general heard this, his face was filled with anger, but his heart was filled with grief and indignation. Yarrow Jinji calmly handed his grandfather a cup of tea. He smiled and said, "General, drinking wine can increase your heroic spirit. But when you arrive in Mirage City and grandfather becomes an official, you should change to drinking tea." Yarrow Zhen angrily took the teacup and drank it all in one gulp. He was still drinking wine. Blue sea tonight. Yarrow Jinji smiled sweetly. The figures of the two Taoists on the riverside were like two wisps of smoke, much faster than the speed of a galloping horse. This pair of Taoist master and disciple, the old man came from an unorthodox Taoist sect called Golden Peak Temple. Don't think that unorthodox Taoist sect is not pleasant to hear. In fact, it is already very impressive. There are not many Taoist cave sects that are qualified to be listed as unorthodox in the entire continent. The Taoists of the Golden Peak Temple liked to cultivate their minds in the secular world. There were not many of them, less than 100 of them. Once they entered the secular world, they would often conceal their names and identities. They did not like to rely on their backers or ancestors. The current master of the Golden Peak Temple was already 500 years old. He was a genuine nascent soul earth immortal and had a great reputation in the northern part of the Tongyi continent. The old man's common name was Yin Miaofeng, and his Taoist title was Taoist Baozhen, which was derived from the saying, "Live a long life and see a long time, keep the truth in all things." He belonged to the line of the master of the Golden Peak Temple. The only direct disciple, Shao Yuanran, was the young Shao Yuanran that Yin Miaofeng met by chance after he left the mountain and entered the secular world. It took Yin Miaofeng a total of 14 years to decide to take him in. During this period, Taoist Baozhen set up 3 major tests and Shao Yuanran passed all of them. Shao Yuanran followed Taoist Baozhen to the Golden Peak Temple to meet the master of the Golden Peak Temple. He paid his respects to the statue hanging in the ancestral hall and his name was recorded in the sect register. From then on, he officially became a disciple of the Golden Peak Temple. In the end, he followed his master to the Great Spring Dynasty. The two of them became the consecrators of the Liu family and were responsible for watching the border of the southern border for 10 years. Although Shao Yuanran looked like a handsome young man, he was actually in his 40s. The two of them were both cultivators of the Dragon Gate realm. Taoist Baozhen admitted that he had no hope of becoming an Aurus Core realm cultivator in his lifetime. Shao Yuanran's aptitude was far better than his. He had reached the Dragon Gate realm above the sea at such a young age and was truly a cultivation genius. When the master of the temple heard that Shao Yuanran had broken through at the border of the Great Spring Dynasty, he specially sent him down the mountain and gave him a magic weapon of the sect. He also promised that as long as Shao Yuanran successfully reached the Aurus Core realm, he would also give him a precious treasure that had been passed down for 1,000 years. When Shao Yuanran returned to the mountain, he would take it as a congratulatory gift. Therefore, Yin Miaofeng hoped that he could use the solid foundation of the Great Spring Liu family to help Shao Yuanran reach a higher level and become a Aurus Core realm cultivator. Only then would he become an immortal. Qi cultivators below the Aurus Core realm were still in the big and small cages. Regarding the matter of General Yarou Zhen going to the capital to take up a post, Shao Yuanran had been holding it in for a long time. Tonight, he finally asked, "Master, did the Yarou family really escape the disaster just like that?" Yin Miaofeng asked, "Why, are you very disappointed? If the Yarou family can escape unscathed, Yarou Jinji can continue to live her peaceful life. Maybe when she reaches the Mirage City, she will soon marry into a rich and powerful family and it will be difficult to meet her again. Therefore, you are not very happy in your heart." Shao Yuanran shook his head and smiled. It is inevitable to feel disappointed. However, cultivation is to cultivate the heart and let nature take its course. If the Yarou family is destroyed, I will naturally protect Yarou Jinji and protect her under my wings. However, since the Yarou family has overcome the crisis, it means that Yarou Jinji and I are not fated to meet. There is no need to force it. There will be opportunities in the future. Yin Miaofeng smiled and said, "There are often 1,000-year-old trees in the deep mountains, but there are rarely people who are 100 years old in the mortal world. Yarou Jinji is not a cultivator. Now that she is beautiful and moving, it is normal for you to be attracted to her. However, 20 years later, even if the opportunity comes, she will already be an old woman. At that time, if you are lucky, you might already be a land immortal. Will you still be attracted to a mortal woman with a faded appearance?" Shao Yuanran smiled and said, "Then we will talk about it when the time comes." Shao Yuanran was silent for a moment. His ears whistled like the wind as he asked, "Master, why did we suddenly visit the Baiyu Manor this time?" Is it related to the flying sword message we received from the capital yesterday? Yin Miaofeng smiled faintly and said, in short, it is not a small matter. Xiao Yuanran smiled helplessly. Since his master did not want to say more, he could only suppress his curiosity. The Baiyu Manor was the manor of the buried river god. It was similar to the Jin Huang Manor where the third prince had escorted the prisoners. However, the Jin Huang Manor had lost its owner. Now, it was mostly a gathering of mountain spirits and ghosts. After this battle, the northern Jin kingdom's luck could be said to have been greatly damaged. The Jin Huang mountain god would soon be escorted to the Mirage City. The Pine Needle Lake Water Deity Temple, which had been at loggerheads with the northern Jin kingdom for hundreds of years, collapsed even earlier. The remnants of the Water Deity Temple were only a few shrimp soldiers and crab generals. However, Xiao Yuanran thought of something and laughed involuntarily. The mountain god's wife, who had just been married by the Jin Huang mountain god, became a prisoner in the blink of an eye. This woman was really unlucky. She thought that she would be able to be husband and wife for hundreds of years, which was far better than a pair of lovebirds in the mortal world. She did not expect such an ending. He just did not know how the Mirage City would deal with her. However, these trivial matters of the mortal world were just interesting things on the path of cultivation. What Xiao Yuanran saw was the great way of the earth immortals. What he thought in his heart was immortality and longevity. Xiao Yuanran's heart was full of pride. There was no one around on both sides of the buried river. He laughed and said, "Master, I am going to learn from the big dragon and walk on the river." The young Taoist from the Golden Peak Temple floated to the surface of the river and stepped on the water. Every time he stepped on the river, there was a huge splash of water. However, there was not a drop of water on his Taoist robe. Yin Miaofeng was still floating by the river. He looked at the graceful posture of his proud disciple and scolded in a low voice, "Brat, when you become an earth immortal in the future, what will happen?" Chen Pinggan only knew the approximate distance and location of the water god temple. Fortunately, he only needed to follow the river and keep an eye on both sides. According to Yarou Zhan and Yarou Jinji, the water god temple was built on a nameless hill by the river 300 miles downstream from the post house. The hillside was gentle. The temple fair was held from the 1st to the 15th of March every year. There were more than 100 incense parties for the gods to perform their skills. It was very lively. The high officials and dignitaries in the nearby counties would give porridge and tea during the temple fair. Yarou Zhan sighed with emotion at that time. For the gods of mountains and rivers, opening a mansion was the first major threshold. If they could upgrade their mansion to a palace, they would really achieve Dao. It was no different from a certain immortal family on the mountain obtaining the word sect. Yarou Jinji emphasized another strange thing about the water god temple. The side hall enshrined a statue of the goddess of inspiration. It was very effective in praying for children. Almost every day, there would be women coming from afar. Most of them were from wealthy families and had difficulties in childbirth. They would come to the side hall of the water god temple, kowtow, burn incense, and give some money. They would be able to get a small clay doll with a red string around its waist and tie it to their wrist. Once they were successful in giving birth, they would not need to return home to fulfill their wish. However, the clay doll they brought home could not be thrown away. It had to be enshrined as a distant reward for the goddess of inspiration's kindness. However, what Chen Pinggan really wanted to see was in front of the water god temple. There were more than 200 white jade tablets. Most of them were beautiful writings of the imperial court and scholars praising the god of Buried River after the god of Buried River helped the great Spring Liu family to settle the drought. In less than 4 hours, Chen Pinggan, who was constantly looking left and right, floated along the water of the Buried River and finally arrived at the mountain by the river. The night was deep and the gate of the water god temple was closed. However, Chen Pinggan could still see the brilliant lights from afar. This was also the reason why Chen Pinggan could see the water god temple at a glance. Chen Pinggan suddenly realized that although Pei Qian and Zhu Lian could not see him, what if there were Qi refinement warriors of the middle 5 states at the water god temple? Would they see through him at a glance and see him as a demon that appeared at night? This made Chen Pinggan somewhat hesitant. Could it be that he had to travel 300 miles for nothing? Including the way back, it would be 300 miles. However, after thinking about it, Chen Pinggan, who was floating in the middle of the buried river, still decided to try going ashore. The worst outcome was that he would glance at the gate of the water god temple from afar and alert the temple attendants or the cultivators here. He would then be chased for 300 miles. He could only let the old general at the post house, Yarrow Zhun, come forward to explain. At this moment, a familiar voice rang in his ears. Yin spirit night roaming? Chen Pinggan, aren't you a pure martial artist? Can't you be more reasonable? Chen Pinggan turned his head and did not know whether to laugh or cry. 30 steps away, a green-robed scholar was squatting on the surface of the river. His hands were clutching a bunch of hair, as if he was trying to pull someone out from the buried river. It was Zhong Kuei, the desert-mad saber that laughed proudly in the pugilistic world. Chen Pinggan came to Zhong Kuei's side and asked, "This is?" Zhong Kuei raised his head and smiled. "I was fighting for territory at the water god temple just now. I was thinking of burning the first incense after daybreak and praying for the gods to bless me so that Zhonyang would be more pleasing to the eye." Chen Pinggan pointed at the hair in Zhong Kuei's hand. "I'm talking about this." Zhong Kuei rolled his eyes and said, "What else could a water ghost that died unjustly in the river be? It was probably attracted by your yin spirit. If it ate you, its cultivation base would definitely skyrocket. I saw it poking its head out and looking around. Its face wasn't as ugly as a normal water ghost's. Instead, it looked rather fresh and pretty. I wanted to make a deal with this female ghost. Come out and chat with me." Because Zhong Kuei's yin spirit and yang spirit were not roaming out of his body like that night, his entire body was filled with great spirit. Tonight, he was like the yin's usual, deliberately concealing his qi. Therefore, the water ghosts at the bottom of the river did not sink into the depths of the river and shiver like that night. Otherwise, if Zhong Kuei only went near the water god temple, the water ghosts buried in the river would probably have their souls scattered. Zhong Kuei's 2 sleeves contained the austere autumn wind. It did not matter if you were a water ghost that died unjustly or an evil ghost that suffered retribution. Chen Pinggan looked at the female ghost's hair in Zhong Kuei's hand and then looked at Zhong Kuei, who was tugging at the river with the female ghost. Chen Pinggan asked, "Is it fun?" Zhong Kuei nodded. Chen Pinggan turned his head and looked at the water god temple in the distance. Zhong Kuei loosened the hair in his hand. The shadow under the river seemed to have been pardoned and disappeared in a flash. Zhong Kuei stood up and stretched out his hand to press on Chen Pinggan's yin spirit's shoulder. He smiled and said, "Look carefully and you will know whether it is fun or not." The 2 of them suddenly fell into the river. The yin spirit roamed at night and saw all things in the world. It was as bright as day. Even in the river, at a glance, there was no obstruction in his vision. His eyesight was on par with the martial cultivation of Chen Pinggan's real body. Chen Pinggan had seen many ghosts and monsters, but this was the first time he felt disgusted. Not far away was the water god temple and the people's lights. But even so, under the river, Chen Pinggan and Zhong Kuei were surrounded by densely packed water ghosts. They were motionless, and most of them were dressed in snow-white clothes. Their pitch-black hair covered their faces and fell to their waists. They looked like reserved ladies who were out on the streets, wearing a hat that was commonly known as a maid's hat. Not only that, Chen Pinggan looked down and saw a pair of silver-white eyes that were as big as lanterns. It was unusually cold and stared at the 2 of them. However, he could not see its body clearly. The 2 of them were at least a mile apart, but the pair of eyes were still so huge. One could imagine how huge it would be if one looked at it from a close distance. Zhong Kuei smiled and said, "It and the water ghosts were all attracted by you, but they did not dare to eat you. First of all, although your yin spirit is only in its embryonic form, it is still somewhat unusual. They did not dare to act rashly, but they were really envious and kept gathering together. Moreover, they were harboring evil intentions, hoping that you could alarm the monster at the bottom of the river and kill it so that they could have a share of the loot. In the end, you just happened to stop at the water deity temple and stopped moving. The demon below is probably about to explode in anger and doesn't dare to act rashly. After all, the Jade Touring Manor where the river deity was buried is not far from here. Since he was here, he should take things as they came. Chen Pinggan looked around, as if he was admiring the scenery. Zhong Kuei was also looking around and shouted, "The beautiful water ghost lady just now, are you still there? If you are not willing to continue being a water ghost, I can slap you to death. As for whether you can reincarnate, I can't guarantee. But it is not difficult to help you break away from the monster at the bottom of the river and not help it do evil and harm people." The pair of lanterns became slightly bigger. Chen Pinggan subconsciously squinted his eyes and looked over. It was just like when he went fishing for eels in the fields when he was a child and saw one by chance. Its head and body slowly swam out. This monster buried in the river, roughly estimated, was actually bigger than the two black and white pythons on the Chiduan mountain. Chen Pinggan asked, "The river deity buried in the river does not care about it?" Zhong Kuei smiled and said, "Does not care. No matter what, this bad-tempered water god does not like to show up because she has tried to kill this monster again and again. She has already hurt the foundation of her golden body 3 times. Almost every 30 or 40 years, she has to teach this monster a lesson. In 100 years, there will even be a real life and death battle. The worst time was when cracks appeared on the golden body of the water god temple and more than half of the Bio Manor was drowned." Chen Pinggan was even more confused. The imperial court does not try to encircle and suppress it. If the imperial court of the Great Spring Country can't do it, the academy will not care. Zhong Kuei held the back of his head with both hands. The world is not simple. This water demon is able to live until today because, other than its cultivation, it relies more on its intelligence. Moreover, the central part of the Tongya continent is so big and there are so few people in the Dafu Academy. There are even fewer people who can kill this monster. Scholars in the academy have to cultivate their body and mind. They are very busy studying every day and strive to be a sage, a gentleman, a saint, and a great saint who can be sculpted in the central divine continent's Confucian temple. There are even more things to do besides studying. Besides, the Great Spring Dynasty does have a gentleman waiting for you. Chen Pinggan nodded, understanding in his heart. During the trip to the Lotus Flower Blessed Land, he had a panoramic view of the human world. Zhong Kuei only needed to say that there was already a gentleman in the Great Spring Country. Chen Pinggan understood at once. Presumably, the academy was also involved in the competition between the schools. However, Zhong Kuei's next words opened Chen Pinggan's eyes. He pointed to the lanterns at the bottom of the river and said, "Why don't you try glaring at me again? Do you believe that I will skin you alive and send you to the river deity buried in the river as a congratulatory gift?" The water demon slowly retreated. The water demons also dispersed. Chen Pinggan asked, "Congratulatory gift?" Zhong Kuei nodded and said, "The reason why I came here is because I received news that the Mianhe River Bio Mansion is going to be promoted to the Bio Palace. The Great Spring Country's Liuxia's decision is acknowledged by the Academy. In fact, the Great Spring Country is not qualified to confer the title of palace. I guess it is the gentleman in the Mirage City's way of mending the pen after a sheep is lost. A river deity who obtained the title of Orthodox must first be recognized by the imperial court. The monarch would confer the title, and the Ministry of Rights would bestow golden letters, jade archives, silver tokens, and iron certificates. After being recorded in the country's imperial registry, the deity would be qualified to set up an ancestral temple, build a golden body, and receive incense from the human world. At the same time, the deity would have to obtain the approval of the neighboring academies of the continent. Otherwise, it would still be an orthodox temple of a country, but an obscene temple of a continent. Some small temples of local water deities could be ignored, but large temples of water deities would be regarded as incomplete. They would try their best to plead the emperor to ask for a book from the Confucian Academy and worship it. As for which saint the Confucian book was written by, it could be determined at their discretion. Usually, the Academy would give it to them, but there were also a few stubborn water gods who would openly ask for a certain classic of a certain saint. However, this kind of situation was rare, and it was even rarer in the Tongya continent. How could there be many water deities who dared to compete with the 72 academies in the world? Zhong Kuei did not tell Chen Pinggan the whole truth. The reason why he joined in the fun and temporarily left Hua Town was that the notoriously irritable water deity of the Bio Mansion was not flattered by the fact that she was about to be promoted to the palace, nor was she grateful to Lady de Quan Liu and the Dafu Academy. Instead, she declared that she wanted a certain sage's book to guard the water deity palace. Otherwise, she could just continue to hang the plaque of Bio Mansion. As for that sage's book, it had nothing to do with sage. This was what made Lady de Quan Liu break down the most. Because that book was written by the sage of literature in the past. When Zhong Kuei heard that it was such a farce, he felt that he had to come to the Bio Mansion. It was just that he did not expect to meet Chen Pinggan, who was traveling with a yin spirit. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories,